Tonight, we're uncovering weird House of the Dragon facts. This is one of those topics with more beneath the surface, but I'll keep the tone calm so you can relax into the story. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now, back to the video. House of the Dragon begins with a decision made at Harrenhal in the year 101 after Aegon's conquest, when the aging King Jaehaerys calls the Great Council to settle a question that has quietly troubled the realm for years. The choice is between two branches of the royal family, and the result favors Viserys Targaryen over his cousin, Rhaenys. It is a peaceful decision, at least on the surface, yet it leaves behind a rather uncomfortable precedent. When inheritance becomes uncertain, many powerful lords are more comfortable choosing a male claimant than a female one. That old decision lingers over nearly everything that follows. Viserys becomes king during a remarkably prosperous stretch of Targaryen rule, when the family possesses more dragons than any house in Westeros could ever hope to challenge. The Targaryens have ruled the Seven Kingdoms for roughly a century. Their palace is full of silver-haired princes and princesses, ancient heirlooms, whispered rivalries, and dragons sleeping in the shadows beneath King's Landing. The strange thing is that this magnificent age of power is already built around a weakness. Dragons make the Targaryens nearly unbeatable against other houses, but they do not make Targaryens better at agreeing with one another. In fact, the creatures make family disputes far more dangerous. A disagreement over a title can become a disagreement between armies. And an army with a dragon is not quite like any other army in the history of Westeros. The source material is unusual as well. House of the Dragon is adapted from Fire and Blood, but Fire and Blood is not written like a typical novel. It presents itself as a history assembled by a maester, long after many of the people involved have died. The account draws from court records, rumors, letters, and several witnesses whose stories do not always match. One of them is a jester, another is a septon, and another is a rather scandalous court observer known as Mushroom. So even inside the fictional world, history is uncertain. A single royal argument may have 3 different versions. A secret meeting may have happened exactly as reported, or may have been embroidered by someone who heard it second-hand years later. It gives this chapter of Targaryen history the quiet, dusty feeling of a disputed chronicle, where the truth is often hidden beneath the preferences of whoever happened to write it down. The Targaryens themselves came from old Valyria, a civilization of dragon lords that existed across the narrow sea long before the Seven Kingdoms were united. Valyria was famous for its dragons, its sorcery, and its roads made from fused black stone. Then came the Doom, a catastrophic event that destroyed much of the Valyrian freehold. The exact cause remains mysterious, even centuries later. The Targaryens survived because they had moved to Dragonstone before the Doom. Their family was not considered the greatest among Valyria's dragonlord houses, which makes their later conquest of Westeros feel even more unlikely. They were survivors of a fallen world who arrived on a dark volcanic island with their dragons, their language, and their belief that they were set apart from ordinary rulers. By the era of House of the Dragon, old Valyria is gone, but its echoes are everywhere. The royal family speaks High Valyrian in private moments. Their names carry the rhythm of an older civilization: Viserys, Rhaenyra, Daemon, Rhaenys, Aegon. Their customs can seem strange to the rest of Westeros, especially the tradition of close family marriages meant to preserve what they call the blood of the dragon. And then there are the dragons themselves. They are not simply large weapons with wings. Each has a temperament, a history, and an individual relationship with its rider. Vhagar, the oldest and largest living dragon of this period, has already lived through generations of Targaryens. She is so ancient that she feels less like an animal and more like a surviving piece of history, carrying the memory of conquest in her scales and scars. To understand the world of House of the Dragon, you have to step back into a time when dragons were not a legend, but a daily fact of life. Nearly 2 centuries before Daenerys Targaryen was born in exile across the Narrow Sea, her ancestors ruled Westeros from a throne that was still sharp with the swords of conquered enemies. The Iron Throne itself looked different then, not the relatively modest seat that later kings would sit in, but a monstrous, jagged staircase of 1,000 blades, rising so high that a king could barely climb it without cutting himself. That throne was a statement. It said that the Targaryens had won this land by fire and blood, and they intended to keep it. At the height of their power, the Targaryens had more dragons than any house in the history of Westeros. During the reign of Viserys I, there were roughly 17 dragons living in the Dragon Pit, beneath King's Landing, and on Dragonstone. That number is staggering when you remember that by the time of Daenerys, only 3 dragon eggs remained, and they had turned to stone. In this era, the sky above the capital was often darkened by wings. Young princes and princesses would take their dragons out for afternoon flights, and the roar of a dragon was as common as the ringing of bells in a city like Old Town. The Targaryens themselves were at their most confident. They had ruled for about 100 years since Aegon the Conqueror unified the 7 kingdoms. Their bloodline was strong, their treasury full, and their court glittered with silver-haired nobles who spoke High Valyrian as a mark of status. They practiced a custom that seemed strange to the rest of Westeros, marrying brother to sister, cousin to cousin, all to keep the blood of the dragon pure. It was a tradition that had worked for them in Old Valyria, and they believed it was the only way to maintain their bond with the dragons. And for a time, it did work. The family produced riders who could tame even the most ancient of beasts. Take Vhagar, for example. She was the oldest living dragon in the world during the events of House of the Dragon. She had been ridden by Aegon the Conqueror's own sister wife, Visenya, and by the time of Viserys I, she was still alive, enormous, and scarred from 100 years of battle. Her wings could cast a shadow over an entire village. She was not just a weapon, she was a living monument to Targaryen supremacy. And she was not alone. There was Caraxes, the bloodworm, fierce and battle-hardened. There was Meleys, the Red Queen, swift and proud. There was Syrax, named after a Valyrian goddess, golden and sleek. Each dragon had its own personality, its own history, and its own rider. The bond between dragon and rider was intimate and lifelong. It was not something you could simply inherit. You had to earn it. But here is where the cracks begin to show. The Targaryens had built their entire system of rule around the dragons. The dragons made them unbeatable against any other house. But the dragons did not make them better at agreeing with one another. In fact, the creatures made family disputes far more dangerous. A disagreement over a title could become a disagreement between armies. And an army with a dragon is not like any other army. When the succession became uncertain, as it did after the Great Council of Harrenhal, the seeds of civil war were already planted. The decision to favor a male claimant over a female one, even when the female claimant was arguably more qualified, left a wound that would fester for decades. The Targaryens were also isolated in their own confidence. They had intermarried so much that their family tree was more like a circle. The same names repeated generation after generation: Aegon, Viserys, Rhaenyra, Daemon, Rhaenys. They believed their blood made them special, but it also made them fragile. A single illness or accident could wipe out a branch of the family, and when the dragons began to die in the wars to come, the Targaryens would find themselves suddenly ordinary. For now, though, the realm is still golden. The court at King's Landing is full of whispers and rivalries, but the dragons keep the peace. The small folk see the great beasts sleeping in the dragon pit and feel safe. The lords of the great houses send their sons and daughters to serve as cupbearers and ladies-in-waiting, hoping to win favor with the dragon lords. The wealth of the realm flows through the hands of the Targaryens and their closest allies, the Valyrians, whose fleet commands the seas. Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, has sailed to the far ends of the known world and brought back treasures that make even the royal vaults seem modest. Yet beneath the surface, the cracks are already spreading. The king is aging. His chosen heir is a woman, and many lords do not accept that. The queen's family, the Hightowers, are quietly building influence. The king's brother, Daemon, is a restless and dangerous man who commands a dragon and an army of loyal followers. The great houses are choosing sides before the war even begins, and the dragons, for all their power, cannot stop a family from tearing itself apart. That is the world we are about to enter, a kingdom before winter, where the sun still shines on the dragons, but the first chill is already in the air. And the story of how that golden age collapsed into fire and blood is one that begins with a single decision made at a council in Harrenhal and ends with a dynasty reduced to ash and memory. But before we get to the war itself, we need to understand the people who rode those dragons and the bonds that would either save them or destroy them. We left Westeros at a time when dragons were not a distant legend but a living reality, when the sky was thick with wings and the Iron Throne was still warm from the fire of Valyria. But the story we know of that age comes to us through a very strange kind of book. Not a novel, not a chronicle written by a single author with a clear point of view, but something far more slippery. George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood is not a traditional narrative. It is an in-universe history, compiled by a maester named Gyldain, writing centuries after the events he describes. And maesters, as any student of Westeros knows, are not neutral. They have their own loyalties, their own biases, their own silences. The book pretends to be a straightforward account of the Targaryen dynasty, but the moment you start reading, you realize it is anything but. Gyldain constantly cites conflicting sources. He tells you that one chronicler says the prince died in battle, while another insists he was poisoned. He notes that the official court records say one thing, but the letters of a serving girl suggest something else. The result is a history that feels alive with argument, with rumor, with deliberate gaps. You are never allowed to settle into a single truth. Instead, you are forced to weigh the evidence yourself, to decide which witness you trust, and to accept that some details are simply lost. This is not an accident. Martin deliberately constructed Fire and Blood to mirror the way real medieval histories were written. Monks and scribes would copy earlier manuscripts, sometimes inserting their own opinions, sometimes omitting inconvenient facts, sometimes inventing whole episodes to flatter a patron. The Dance of the Dragons, the civil war that House of the Dragon depicts, is remembered through exactly this kind of damaged record. The war itself was so destructive that it burned libraries, killed scribes, and scattered archives. The accounts that survive are fragmentary, partisan, and often contradictory. One of the most telling examples involves the death of a major character. Depending on which source you read, the prince either fell in single combat, was betrayed by his own men, or was struck down by a dragon's flame. Gyldain presents all three versions, and then shrugs. He cannot say which is true. He can only report what the witnesses claimed, and those witnesses had their own reasons to lie. The maester himself has a preference, but he is honest enough to admit it is just a preference. This is the voice of a historian who knows his limitations, and that is the real genius of Fire and Blood. It does not give you a clean story. It gives you a messy, human, unreliable story. The Dance of the Dragons becomes not just a war of dragons and armies, but a war of memories. The winners wrote the official histories, but the losers whispered their own versions into letters and songs that survived in hidden chests. The showrunners of House of the Dragon had to navigate this same fog. They could not simply adapt a single clear narrative. They had to choose which version of events to follow, and sometimes they had to invent their own, guided by the spirit of the conflicting accounts. So when you watch the series, you are watching a story that knows it is being told. The characters themselves are aware that their actions will be recorded, distorted, and debated. Rhaenyra and Alicent both try to control the narrative, to shape how future generations will remember them. And the Maesters, centuries later, are still trying to sort out what really happened. This is what makes the world feel so deep. The history is not a monolith. It is a conversation, full of interruptions, arguments, and long silences. And that conversation extends to the dragons themselves. The number of dragons, their sizes, their temperaments, all of these details come to us through the same broken lens. Some dragons are well documented because their riders were powerful and literate. Others are barely mentioned, their names surviving only in a single line of an old poem. The largest dragon of the era, Vhagar, is described in multiple sources, but even her exact age is a matter of dispute. Some say she was hatched during the reign of Aegon the Conqueror. Others claim she was already old when Aegon landed. The truth is buried under centuries of dust. This uncertainty is not a flaw. It is the point. The Dance of the Dragons is a war remembered through damaged records, and that damage is part of its tragedy. The fire that consumed so many lives also consumed the truth. What we have left are fragments, and those fragments are what we build our stories on. As we move deeper into the facts of this era, keep in mind that every number, every date, every dragon's name comes with a footnote. The maester who wrote it down might have been wrong, the witness who told him might have been lying, and the truth might be something else entirely, waiting in a scroll that turned to ash 1,000 years ago. The Chronicle of Ease, written by maesters, and maesters are men of the citadel, not of the dragon. They can describe the Targaryens, but they cannot fully explain them. To understand the Targaryens, you have to go back further than the maesters can comfortably reach. You have to go back to a place that no longer exists. Before Westeros, before the Iron Throne, before Aegon the Conqueror even set foot on the shores of what would become the Crown Lands, the Targaryens were not kings. They were not even lords of a great kingdom. They were a single family among many, living in a civilization that had already mastered the world. That civilization was Old Valyria. Old Valyria was not a kingdom, it was an empire, and it was built on something that no other human society had ever controlled. The Valyrians did not mine gold or trade silk or conquer with armies of foot soldiers. They conquered with dragons. The Valyrian freehold, as it was called, was a civilization of dragon lords, noble families who could claim the blood of the dragon, who could raise and ride and command the largest living creatures the world has ever known. For thousands of years, the Valyrian freehold was the undisputed power of the known world. Their capital city, Valyria, was a place of black stone towers and volcanic forges, where sorcery and steel were woven together into blades that would never dull. The Valyrians built roads that stretched across continents. They spoke a language that crackled with power, and they bred dragons as other men breed horses. The Targaryens were one of those dragon lord families, but they were never the most powerful. In the hierarchy of Old Valyria, they were considered minor nobility. They had dragons, yes, but fewer than the great houses. They were respected, but they were not the rulers. And then, something strange happened. A Targaryen lord named Rhaenyra had a daughter who was a dreamer. She saw visions of a catastrophe so complete that it would wipe the Valyrian freehold from the face of the earth. Rhaenyra believed her. He sold most of his holdings in Valyria and moved his entire family, along with their 5 dragons, to a small, volcanic island in the narrow sea. That island was called Dragonstone. The other dragon lords laughed at him. They called him Rhaenyra the Exile. They said he had abandoned glory for a black rock in the middle of nowhere, but Rhaenyra did not care. He built a fortress of fused black stone, a castle that looked like it had been carved from the mountain itself, and he waited. He waited for 12 years, and then the doom came. The doom of Valyria was not a war, it was not a plague. It was a single, catastrophic event that destroyed an entire civilization in a matter of hours. The volcanoes that surrounded the Valyrian peninsula erupted with a force that shattered the land itself. The ground split open, the seas boiled, the sky turned black with ash. Every dragon lord in Valyria, every sorcerer, every slave, every stone of the capital city was consumed in fire and stone and water. The empire that had ruled the world for 5,000 years was gone in a single night. But the Targaryens were not there. They were on Dragonstone, watching the smoke rise from across the sea. They were the only Dragonlord family to survive, the only ones who had listened to a dream, the only ones who had escaped the end of the world. That is the origin of House Targaryen. They are not just a royal family, they are a relic. Every strand of silver hair, every strange custom, every dragon they ever rode, is a piece of a world that no longer exists. They are the last echo of old Valyria. When you see a Targaryen, you are seeing a ghost of an empire that burned itself out of history. And for a century after the doom, they stayed on Dragonstone. They did not try to conquer Westeros. They did not try to rebuild Valyria. They simply existed. The last dragon lords in a world that had forgotten what dragons could do. Until one day, a Targaryen lord looked west and decided that it was time to remind them. That lord was Aegon the Conqueror, and the story of how he turned a small island fortress into a kingdom that would last for nearly 300 years is a story that begins with a single choice. A choice to leave the ashes of the past behind and to build something new with the fire that remained. So the Targaryens fled the doom of Valyria, a handful of dragonlords who saw the end coming and got out just in time. They landed on Dragonstone, a volcanic island off the coast of Westeros, and for over a century they mostly kept to themselves. They watched, they waited, they grew their power in isolation. And then came Aegon the Conqueror. Aegon Targaryen was not the first of his family to dream of ruling the Seven Kingdoms, but he was the first to actually try it, and he had something no one else had. He had 3 dragons, Balerion, Vhagar, and Caraxes. And these were not the small, almost domesticated dragons you might imagine from later centuries. These were monsters. Balerion alone could swallow a horse whole, and his fire could melt stone. When Aegon landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, he didn't bring a massive army. He brought a few thousand men and 3 living weapons. The lords of Westeros had seen dragons before, but only as distant legends or as pets kept by a reclusive family on an island. They had never seen what a dragon could do in war. Aegon showed them. The first major test was the Kingdom of the Stormlands. Argilac the Arrogant, the last Storm King, met Aegon in battle with a host of thousands. He had war elephants, heavy cavalry, and years of military experience. Aegon had Caraxes, one dragon pass over the Storm King's lines, and the battle was over before it truly began. Argilac died, his kingdom fell, and the other lords began to understand that the old rules no longer applied. But the real demonstration came at Harrenhal. Harren the Black, king of the Iron Islands and the Riverlands, had spent 40 years building the largest castle in Westeros. Its towers were so tall they scraped the clouds, its walls so thick no siege engine could crack them. Harren boasted that his fortress was impregnable, that no army could take it, that he could wait out any siege. He was right about the armies. He was wrong about the dragons. Aegon flew Balerion directly over Harrenhal and unleashed dragonfire for an entire night. The stone melted. The towers sagged and collapsed. Harren and his sons burned alive inside their own great hall. The castle was never rebuilt, and its ruins still stand as a monument to what dragonfire can do. After Harrenhal, the remaining kings of Westeros surrendered. They had no choice. Armies could be raised, marriages could be arranged, alliances could be broken, but there was no defense against a dragon. Aegon was crowned at the site of his landing, in a makeshift ceremony on what would become the Aegon Fort. He took the Iron Throne not as a seat of comfort, but as a symbol of what he had done. The throne was forged from the swords of his defeated enemies, 1,000 blades twisted and jagged, sharp enough to cut the unwary. It was not meant to be comfortable. It was meant to remind every ruler who sat on it that power is won through blood and fire. The Targaryens would say that a wise king never sits easy on the Iron Throne, and they meant it literally. The throne could kill you if you leaned the wrong way. And so the Targaryen dynasty began. Aegon unified 6 of the 7 kingdoms under his rule, with Dawn holding out for another century. He established a new capital at King's Landing, built a new road system, and imposed a single law across the continent. All of this was possible because of dragons. Without them, Aegon would have been just another ambitious warlord with a good story. With them, he became a conqueror whose name would echo for millennia. Now here is the strange part. When the events of House of the Dragon begin, the Targaryen dynasty is only about a century old. Aegon's conquest happened roughly 100 years before the Great Council of Harrenhal. That means the dragons are still everywhere. The memory of the conquest is still fresh, and the family is still riding the high of their original victory. But that also means the cracks are already starting to show. The Targaryens have spent 100 years marrying brother to sister, keeping their blood pure, and hoarding their dragons like a treasure they refuse to share. They have produced some brilliant rulers and some disastrous ones. They have made alliances, broken treaties, and crushed rebellions, but they have never solved the fundamental problem of succession. When a family rules through fire and blood, what happens when the fire goes out? Or worse, what happens when there are too many dragons and not enough thrones? That is the question that will tear them apart. But before we get to the war, we need to understand the dragons themselves. Because in this era, dragons are not just weapons, they are characters in their own right, with personalities, loyalties, and histories that stretch back to the Doom. And the most important of them all is the one that started it all. Aegon the Conqueror brought fire and blood and 3 dragons to forge a single kingdom, but the symbol he left behind to mark that achievement is one of the most misunderstood objects in all of Westeros. When you think of the Iron Throne, you probably picture the version from a wide, almost orderly staircase of swords, with enough room for a ruler to sit comfortably and even shift around a bit. That throne was iconic, but it was also, by George R.R. Martin's own admission, far too tidy. The throne he described in the books was something else entirely, and finally gave us that version. The new Iron Throne is not a chair, it is a mountain, a jagged, asymmetrical heap of thousands of actual blades, all fused together by dragonfire, rising behind the king like a frozen explosion of steel. There is no neat staircase leading up to it. Instead, there are uneven, treacherous steps, each one made of sword hilts and broken crossguards, and the seat itself is a narrow, precarious ledge near the top. If you are the monarch, you do not lounge on this throne. You perch on it, you cling to it, and if you are not careful, you will cut yourself. This design choice was deliberate. The production team went back to the source material and built a throne that actually looks like it was hammered together from the surrendered bones of a conquered continent. It is physically uncomfortable to sit on, and that is the point. Aegon the Conqueror wanted every lord who looked upon the throne to remember that their ancestors had bent the knee, and that the price of rebellion would be paid in blood. The throne is a warning made of metal. It is not meant to be cozy. In the earlier show, the throne was a symbol of power, but it was also a practical set piece. Actors could move around it, scenes could be staged on its wide steps, and it looked impressive in a wide shot. The new throne sacrifices all of that practicality for a much more important quality: menace. When you see King Viserys Targaryen climbing those uneven, sharp-edged steps, you feel the danger. You understand that sitting near power in this era is not a comfortable privilege, it is a physical trial. The throne seems to be daring anyone to sit upon it, as if it might decide to reject the claimant at any moment. And that is the deeper truth that the throne reveals about this entire period of Targaryen history. Conquest is never truly finished. Aegon unified the realm, but the swords that built his throne were never melted down. They are still there, sharp and waiting, a constant reminder that the peace is only as stable as the Dragon Lord who enforces it. By the time of the Dance of the Dragons, the throne is no longer a monument to a completed conquest. It is a warning that the conquest must be maintained, and that the cost of failure is written into the very seat of power. This dangerous, uncomfortable throne sets the tone for everything that follows. It tells you that this is a world where power is not inherited easily, where the ruler must always be on edge, and where the symbols of authority are as brutal as the wars that create them. And if the throne itself is a weapon waiting to cut its occupant, then it is no surprise that the dragons in this era are just as wild and unpredictable. The bond between a dragon and its rider is the other great symbol of Targaryen power, and it is a bond that can be just as treacherous as the Seat of Swords. And that bond is not a simple partnership. In the books, dragons are not pets. They are forces of nature, ancient and willful, and they choose their riders as much as the riders choose them. A dragon might accept a Targaryen one day and reject another the next, or worse, it might turn on its own master if provoked. The Dance of the Dragons begins with a succession crisis, but it is fueled by the unpredictability of these creatures. Vhagar, the oldest and largest dragon alive during the dance, was ridden first by Visenya Targaryen, then by Balon the Brave, then by Laena Velaryon, and finally by Aemon Targaryen. Each rider had to earn the dragon's respect, and each time the dragon changed hands, the realm held its breath. When Aemon claimed Vhagar at the funeral of Laena, the act was seen as an omen, a sign that the old powers were stirring. And indeed, that claim set in motion a chain of events that would tear the family apart. The dragons themselves became weapons of mass destruction, but they were also mirrors of their riders' ambitions and fears. Syrax, the dragon of Queen Rhaenyra, was loyal but pampered, reflecting the queen's own isolation and the weight of expectation. Caraxes, the bloodworm, was fierce and scarred, perfect match for Daemon Targaryen's volatile nature. And then there was Sunfire, the golden dragon of King Aegon II, beautiful and deadly, a creature that embodied the vanity and ruthlessness of its master. The bond between dragon and rider was not just a magical connection, it was a psychological one. A dragon could sense its rider's emotions, and in battle, that link could mean the difference between victory and a fiery death. But it could also be a vulnerability. When a rider died, the dragon often went mad with grief, or it fled, or it became a rogue terror. The dragons of the dance were not symbols of unity. They were agents of chaos, each one a living weapon with a mind of its own. And that is the tragedy of the Targaryens. They built their power on the backs of dragons, but they never truly controlled them. The Iron Throne was a monument to conquest, but the dragons were the living proof that conquest is a cycle, not an endpoint. Every time a new dragon hatched, the balance of power shifted. Every time a dragon died, the realm trembled. By the end of the dance, most of the dragons were dead, and the Targaryens had lost the very thing that made them gods among men. The throne remained, jagged and cold, but without dragons it was just a pile of swords, and that is the deeper story that tells. Not just a war for a seat, but the slow, terrible unravelling of a dynasty that believed it could tame fire and blood. The throne and the dragons are two sides of the same coin, and both are sharp enough to cut the hand that holds them. That Iron Throne, with its thousands of jagged blades, was the seat of absolute power, but it was a power that had always depended on one thing above all others: the dragon. For 100 years after Aegon the Conqueror, the Targaryen dynasty had been defined by its dragons, and by the simple, brutal clarity of its succession. The king named his heir, and that was that. But by the year 101 after Aegon's conquest, that clarity had begun to rot from within. King Jaehaerys I, the old king, had reigned for over half a century. He had seen the realm grow and prosper, but he had also outlived nearly all of his children. His 2 surviving sons had both died before him, leaving a question that no one had ever really had to answer before. Who would sit the throne when the last of the old guard was gone? The answer, it seemed, lay with 2 candidates, and the choice would be made not in a quiet council chamber, but before the entire realm. The Great Council of 101 AC was summoned to the immense, half-ruined castle of Harrenhal. It was a strange place for a decision that would shape the future of a dynasty. Harrenhal was a monument to dragonfire and destruction, a reminder of what happened when power was wielded without mercy. But it was also neutral ground, a place where the lords of Westeros could gather without the immediate shadow of the Iron Throne. And gather they did. Hundreds of lords and knights, representing every major house from the north to Dawn, came to Harrenhal to decide the fate of the kingdom. The 2 claimants stood before them. On one side was Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the daughter of Jaehaerys' eldest son, Prince Aemon. She was a dragon rider, the wife of Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, and she had the strongest direct claim by blood. Her father had been the heir, and by all the laws of inheritance that the rest of Westeros followed, his claim should have passed to his daughter. On the other side was Prince Viserys Targaryen, the grandson of Jaehaerys through his second son, Prince Balon. Viserys was a man, and he was the son of a king's son, but he was not the child of the eldest son. The legal case was murky, but the political reality was not. The lords of Westeros did not choose Rhaenys. They chose Viserys. The vote was overwhelming, with the vast majority of the great houses declaring for the male claimant. The reasons were simple and brutal. They feared a woman on the throne. They feared what it would mean for the stability of the realm, for the succession of their own houses, for the very idea of male authority. They looked at Rhaenys and saw a woman with a stronger line, but they chose Viserys because he was a man. The council's decision was presented as a legal judgment, a clarification of the succession. But it was a political decision, and it was a decision that planted a seed of poison in the heart of the dynasty. King Jaehaerys accepted the council's choice, and Viserys was named his heir. The old king died a few years later, and Viserys I took the throne. The realm was at peace. The succession seemed settled. But the Great Seal of Harrenhal had done something far more dangerous than simply choosing a king. It had established a precedent. It had said, in the clearest possible terms, that the will of the lords could override the law of inheritance. It had said that a woman could be passed over, even if her claim was stronger, because the realm preferred a man, and that precedent would be remembered. It would be cited. It would be weaponized. For a generation, the decision at Harrenhal would haunt the Targaryen dynasty. It created a wound that never truly healed, a fracture line that ran beneath the surface of every succession, every marriage, every political calculation. The lords had chosen Viserys, but they had also created a future where the legitimacy of any queen would be questioned. They had made the throne a prize to be won by the strongest faction, not a right to be inherited by the rightful heir. And when Viserys himself faced the same question, when he had to name his own successor, the ghost of Harrenhal would be standing in the room with him, whispering that the realm's choice could be changed. The Great Council was supposed to be the end of a debate. Instead, it was the beginning of a war that had not yet been named. The dragons were still flying, the throne was still iron, but the foundation had begun to crack, and the cracks would only spread. Because the next question was not about who would inherit, but about what inheritance even meant, when the lords of Westeros had already proven they could rewrite the rules. The Great Council of Harrenhal made its choice in 101 AC, and the lords of Westeros chose Prince Viserys over Princess Rhaenys. But that decision did not simply end the matter. It created a wound that would never fully heal, and it left behind a woman whose name would become a warning for generations to come. Rhaenys Targaryen was the only child of Prince Aemon, the eldest son of King Jaehaerys I. by every tradition of inheritance that had ever mattered in Westeros. She should have been the queen. Her father was the crown prince. When he died, his claim passed to his offspring, but the Great Council decided otherwise. They passed over Rhaenys and her children entirely, choosing instead her cousin Viserys, the grandson of Jaehaerys, through a younger son. The official reasoning was that the crown should not pass through a woman, but the truth was more complicated. The lords of Westeros were not simply rejecting female rule, they were rejecting uncertainty. Rhaenys was married to Corlys Velaryon, the wealthiest man in the realm, and their children bore the Velaryon name. The lords feared that a queen would bring the realm under the influence of House Velaryon, and they preferred a king who would keep power within the Targaryen line as they understood it. So they chose Viserys, a man who seemed safe, predictable, and unthreatening. But here is the dangerous part. The Great Council was not a law, it was a precedent. King Jaehaerys called the council to avoid a war, and it worked. The lords voted, Viserys was crowned, and the realm remained at peace. But that peaceful vote left behind a question that no one wanted to answer. If a council could choose one heir over another, then what was the value of a king's decree? What was the value of a named successor? Rhaenys herself accepted the decision with remarkable grace. She did not raise a rebellion. She did not challenge her cousin for the throne. She returned to Driftmark with her husband and her children and lived the life of a princess who would never be queen. But she did not disappear. She remained a presence at court, a living reminder of what the lords had rejected. And when King Viserys later named his own daughter Rhaenyra as his heir, the memory of Rhaenys became a weapon. The supporters of Rhaenyra argued that the Great Council had been a special case, a one-time solution to a specific problem. It did not establish a law against female inheritance. It simply resolved a disputed succession. But the opponents of Rhaenyra argued the opposite. They said the council had proven that the lords of Westeros would not accept a queen, and that Viserys had no right to override that precedent by naming his daughter as his heir. And so Rhaenys became the queen who never was, not just because she was passed over, but because her name was used to argue against every woman who came after her. She was the proof that the realm had already decided against female rule. Even though the realm had decided nothing of the kind, the council had chosen a person, not a principle. But in the years that followed, that distinction was forgotten. Rhaenys lived to see the succession crisis unfold. She watched as Rhaenyra fought for the crown that should have been hers by right. And she watched as the realm tore itself apart over the same question that had been asked in 101 AC. She had been the first woman passed over by a vote. Rhaenyra would be the second, and the precedent set by the Great Council made it possible for the Greens to argue that Rhaenyra had no legitimate claim at all. The tragedy of Rhaenys is not just that she lost the throne, it is that her loss became a tool used to deny the same right to another woman. She was the queen who never was, and her story is the story of how a peaceful vote can leave behind a dangerous precedent, one that does not die when the vote is over. It lingers, it waits, and when the next succession crisis comes, it rises again to be used as a weapon. That precedent would shape the entire dance of the dragons, and it would echo through the Targaryen dynasty for generations. But before we reach the war itself, we need to understand the dragons that made it possible. The creatures that gave the Targaryens their power were not just weapons. They were living beings with their own histories, their own bonds, and their own terrible significance. And the largest of them all was already old when the dance began. The Great Council of Harrenhal chose Viserys over Rhaenys, and that choice set the course for everything that followed. But the man who took the throne in 103 AC was not the sort of king the Targaryen dynasty had ever produced before. His predecessors were conquerors, crusaders, and iron-fisted rulers who held the realm together through sheer force of will and dragonfire. Viserys I was different. He was a gentle king in a family built on force, and for a long time, That seemed like a good thing. His reign began in peace and extraordinary prosperity. The realm had been unified for nearly a century. The great houses had mostly accepted Targaryen rule, and the dragons were numerous enough to make any thought of rebellion seem absurd. Viserys inherited a kingdom that was stable, wealthy, and largely content. He did not need to conquer anything. He did not need to crush any rebellions. He simply needed to maintain what his ancestors had built, and for years he did exactly that. He was known as a generous and approachable king. He listened to his small council, he valued the advice of his hand, and he genuinely wanted to rule well. He was not cruel, not capricious, not the sort of monarch who burned people alive for disagreeing with him. In any other era, he might have been remembered as one of the great kings of Westeros, but the Targaryens do not live in ordinary eras, and Viserys faced a problem that his gentleness could not solve: the succession. He had no son. His first wife, Aemma Arryn, gave him a daughter named Rhaenyra, but the sons she bore died in infancy or stillbirth. The last of those pregnancies killed her, and Viserys was left a widower with a single living child. He remarried, this time to Alicent Hightower, the daughter of his hand, and she gave him sons. But by then, he had already named Rhaenyra his heir. He had made the lords of the realm swear oaths to her, and he did not want to go back on his word. This is where kindness becomes indecision. Viserys loved his daughter, and he wanted her to rule, but he also loved his sons, and he could see the tension building between the two factions at court. He tried to keep everyone happy. He refused to disinherit Rhaenyra, but he also refused to publicly reaffirm her claim with enough force to silence the doubters. He let the ambiguity fester, because making a definitive choice would mean hurting someone he loved, and the court noticed. The Hightowers began to maneuver. The Valyrians began to feel slighted. Daemon, the king's younger brother, grew restless and unpredictable. Viserys saw all of this happening, and he did what gentle people often do when faced with conflict. He tried to smooth things over. He arranged marriages. He gave out titles. He hoped that everyone would just get along if he gave them enough time. But time was not on his side. His health began to fail. He grew weaker, more tired, more reliant on the maesters and the milk of the poppy, and still, he refused to settle the succession with the kind of brutal clarity that the situation demanded. He could have summoned another great council. He could have publicly stripped Rhaenyra of her title and named Aegon his heir. He could have executed the Hightowers for treason. He did none of these things. He simply kept going, day after day, hoping that the problem would solve itself. It did not. When Viserys finally died, the realm was left with a question that had no peaceful answer. 2 heirs, 2 factions, and a kingdom that had been allowed to drift toward war, because its king could not bring himself to make a painful choice. That is the quiet disaster of Viserys I. He was not a bad king. He was not a tyrant. He was not even particularly foolish. He was simply a man who wanted to be kind, and who could not see that kindness, when it is used to avoid hard decisions, can be just as destructive as cruelty. A peaceful king can still leave a kingdom at war, and the war he left behind would be remembered for centuries as the Dance of the Dragons. A conflict so devastating that it nearly destroyed his house entirely. The tragedy of Viserys is that he had everything a ruler could want: peace, prosperity, dragons, a loyal court, and he lost it all because he could not bring himself to say the one word that might have saved everything: no. Viserys I had done what few Targaryen kings before him had managed. He had presided over a realm that was genuinely at peace. The lords bickered, as lords always do, but there were no wars of conquest, no dragon-fueled rebellions, no bloody feuds tearing the kingdoms apart. The treasury was full, the small council functioned, and the Iron Throne, for all its jagged menace, seemed almost comfortable beneath him. But comfort is a fragile thing in a dynasty built on fire and blood, and Viserys knew it. The problem was not the present. The problem was the future, and the future had no sons. His wife Aemma Arryn had given him a daughter, a healthy living daughter, Her name was Rhaenyra, and she was everything a Targaryen princess ought to be. She had the silver gold hair of old Valyria, the violet eyes that marked her bloodline as something apart from the common people of Westeros. She was clever, willful, and she understood from a very young age that she was not like other girls. She was a dragon rider before she was fully grown, bonded to a yellow-scaled dragon she named Syrax, and she was, by the time she reached her teenage years, the only child King Viserys had who had survived infancy. The Queen had given him stillborn sons, sons who lived only hours, sons who died before they could be named. The weight of that grief pressed down on the entire court, but the succession could not wait for grief to pass. So Viserys made a decision that would echo through the rest of Targaryen history. He named Rhaenyra his heir, not as a regent, not as a placeholder until a son might come along. He named her the Princess of Dragonstone, the traditional title of the heir to the Iron Throne, and he did not do it quietly. He summoned the lords of the Seven Kingdoms to King's Landing, one by one, and made them swear oaths. He made them kneel before the Iron Throne, place their hands on a copy of the seven-pointed star or whatever gods they held sacred, and swear aloud that they would recognize Rhaenyra Targaryen as his rightful successor. The lords swore, every single one of them. Now you have to understand how strange this was. In the entire history of Westeros, no woman had ever sat the Iron Throne. There had been queen regents, queen mothers, women who ruled in all but name through their husbands or sons. But the Iron Throne itself, the seat of Aegon the Conqueror, had never been occupied by a woman. The Great Council of Harrenhal had made that clear when they passed over Princess Rhaenys. The precedent was established. The lords of Westeros did not want a queen. They wanted a king. And yet here was Viserys, telling them that they would have to accept a queen anyway. The oaths they swore were legally binding, at least in theory. But oaths are only as strong as the memory of those who swore them. And memory, as it turns out, is remarkably flexible when ambition enters the room. The lords who knelt before the Iron Throne and swore to defend Rhaenyra's claim included some of the most powerful men in the realm. There was Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, whose fleet and wealth made him a king in all but name. There was Lord Strong of Harrenhal, whose family controlled one of the largest castles in the Riverlands. There were the Lords of the Reach, the Stormlands, the Westerlands, the Vale. They all swore, they all promised, and they all meant it, at least in the moment, with the king's eyes upon them and the Iron Throne looming overhead. But oaths sworn in times of peace are easy to keep. Oaths sworn when the oath-taker has something to gain by breaking them are another matter entirely. Rhaenyra herself was young when she was named heir. She was 8 years old when her father made the announcement. 8 years old, and already carrying the weight of a dynasty on her shoulders. She did not fully understand what she had been given, or what it would cost her. She knew she was special. She knew the lords had bowed to her. She knew her father loved her. What she did not know was that every lord who swore the oath was also filing away a mental note, a calculation, a contingency plan. They were thinking about what would happen if Viserys died and Rhaenyra tried to claim the throne. They were thinking about what would happen if a better candidate emerged. They were thinking about what would happen if the oath became inconvenient. And that is the thing about the succession crisis that would become the Dance of the Dragons. It did not begin with a war. It began with a room full of powerful men, all of them nodding, all of them agreeing, all of them swearing. It began with a king who believed that an oath was enough to secure his daughter's future. It began with a little girl who had no idea that the words spoken in her honor would one day be used as weapons against her. Every oath was a promise, but every promise was also a test, and the test was simple. When the time came, would the lords remember what they had sworn, or would they remember only what was convenient? The answer, as history would record, was not kind to Rhaenyra, but that story was still years away. For now the realm was at peace. The king was alive, the heir was young and beloved, and the lords who had sworn to protect her claim were still in the room, still nodding, still agreeing. The future was a distant concern, and the present was comfortable. The Iron Throne had never been so stable, and stability, in a dynasty built on fire and blood, is almost always the calm before the storm. And so the realm had its named heir, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, the king's eldest surviving child, had been formally presented to the lords of Westeros. They had knelt, sworn their oaths, and promised to uphold her claim after Viserys passed. For a time, the succession seemed settled, but the realm does not remain still, and neither does the royal bedchamber. In the year 109 after the Conquest, Queen Alicent Hightower gave birth to a son. The king named him Aegon, after the conqueror himself. It was a name heavy with meaning, a name that echoed through Targaryen history like a war horn. And in that naming, a simple question was born, one that would quietly split the court into two camps before anyone even realised a line had been drawn. The question was this: who is the true heir? Is it the child the king named, or is it the king's firstborn son? In the laws of Westeros, the answer was not as clear as the lords who swore their oaths might have hoped. The Seven Kingdoms had never been ruled by a queen in her own right. The Great Council of 101 had set a precedent, passing over a woman in favour of a male cousin. And now here was a newborn prince, a son, a male heir born to the king himself. A child cannot rule, of course. A babe in arms cannot command armies or sit the Iron Throne, but a child can be a symbol, and a child can be a weapon, even before he learns to speak. From the moment Aegon drew his first breath, he was no longer just a prince, he was a claim, a living, breathing argument against everything Rhaenyra had been promised. The factions began to form quietly at first. On one side stood those who had sworn to Rhaenyra, the named heir. They were the lords who believed in the king's word, who saw the oaths as binding. On the other side stood those who looked at the infant prince and saw the natural order of things, a son before a daughter, a male heir before a female one. It was the way it had always been, they argued, the way it should be. These two groups would later be called the Blacks and the Greens, named for the colours Rhaenyra and Alicent wore at a great tournament. But in these early years, they were not yet enemies. They were simply courtiers, advisors, family members, each quietly choosing a side. And at the centre of it all was a king who loved his daughter and his wife, and who refused to see the storm gathering on the horizon. The child Aegon grew, and with every year the question grew sharper. The lords who had sworn to Rhaenyra began to wonder if their oaths would hold. The lords who favoured the prince began to whisper, and the Queen Alicent found herself caught between her duty to her husband and her love for her son. She had been a good stepmother to Rhaenyra once, but the birth of Aegon changed everything. A mother's instinct is a powerful thing, and in a court where power is the only currency, instinct can become politics. So the son who changed everything did not simply divide a family, he divided a kingdom, and the division would only deepen as the years passed, until the question of named heir versus eldest son became a war that consumed dragons, lords, and the very future of the Targaryen dynasty. And as the court settled into its two camps, another force was gathering strength beyond the walls of the Red Keep, a force that had been waiting, patient and hungry, for the moment when Targaryen unity began to crack. That force was the power of the great houses, the lords who had not forgotten the lessons of the Dance of the Dragons, and who knew that when dragons fight, the ground beneath them burns. And so the great houses began to stir. In the north, the Starks remembered their oaths to Rhaenyra, but they also remembered the cost of rebellion. In the Riverlands, the Tullys weighed loyalty against survival. The Lannisters, ever pragmatic, watched from the rock, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The Baratheons, bound by blood to the throne, felt the pull of two loyalties. And in the Reach, the Tyrells played their own long game, while the Hightowers, the Queen's own kin, began to gather their strength. The seeds of war were not sown in a single day. They were watered by every whispered counsel, every sidelong glance in the throne room, Every night the king spent alone with his thoughts, while his wife and daughter grew further apart. The dragons themselves seemed to sense the change. They grew restless in the dragon pit, their roars echoing through the streets of King's Landing like distant thunder. And the children, Rhaenyra's sons, Alicent's children, they played together in the courtyards, unaware that their games were rehearsals for a conflict that would define their lives. Time passed. Viserys grew older, frailer, his body failing even as his will refused to bend. He still insisted on harmony, still called his family together for feasts and councils, still pretended that the cracks in the walls were mere shadows. But the cracks were real, and when the king finally closed his eyes for the last time, the realm would not mourn in peace. It would shatter. The question that had been whispered for decades would finally demand an answer, not with words, but with fire and blood. The birth of Aegon changes everything, but it does not change everything overnight. The court does not erupt into war the moment the Queen's son draws his first breath. Instead, the question hangs in the air, unspoken in some rooms and whispered in others. Named heir or eldest son. The words do not yet have blood on them, but they will. Before that fracture becomes a chasm, before the dragons meet in the sky, there is a quieter story, and it begins with two girls who are not yet enemies. They are friends. Young Rhaenyra Targaryen is the realm's delight. She is the king's daughter, the named heir, a girl who rides her dragon Syrax with the confidence of someone who has never been told she cannot have what she wants. She is spirited, sharp-tongued and adored by her father. She grows up in the Red Keep, surrounded by tapestries and stone and the constant hum of court gossip. But she is not lonely. She has Alicent. Alicent Hightower is the daughter of Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King. She is a few years older than Rhaenyra, but the difference in age does not matter when you grow up in the same hallways. Alicent is quiet where Rhaenyra is bold. She is careful where Rhaenyra is reckless. She has learned to read a room the way her father reads a council meeting, watching and waiting and saying only what is safe. But with Rhaenyra, she does not have to be careful. They are companions. They share secrets. They whisper late into the night about the future, about the men they might marry, about the weight of being women in a world that belongs to men. Rhaenyra tells Alicent about her dragon. Alicent tells Rhaenyra about her mother, who died when she was young. They are not rivals yet. They are the only people in the Red Keep who truly understand each other. The early story of House of the Dragon does not begin with hatred. It begins with friendship. And that is what makes the eventual fracture so devastating, because the pressure does not come from a single dramatic betrayal. It comes slowly. It comes from marriage, from motherhood, from duty, from the endless churn of court gossip that turns small misunderstandings into permanent wounds. Rhaenyra is named heir, but she is also a princess, and a princess must marry. Her father arranges a match with Lyonor Velaryon, a man she does not love, a man who does not love her. She does what she is told, because that is what duty demands. But the marriage is hollow, and in that hollowness, she seeks comfort elsewhere. She takes a lover. She has children who are not her husband's. The court whispers. The rumours grow. Alicent, meanwhile, becomes queen. She marries Viserys not out of love, but out of obligation, out of her father's ambition, out of the quiet pressure that has shaped her entire life. She gives birth to sons. She watches her husband grow frail. She listens to the lords who say her son should be king, and she begins to believe them. The friendship does not break all at once. It frays. It stretches. Rhaenyra leaves for Dragonstone, the Targaryen stronghold across the narrow sea. Alicent stays in King's Landing, surrounded by her children and her father, and the endless demands of the crown. They see each other less. They trust each other less. The gossip that once seemed harmless becomes a weapon, and then the king dies. Viserys Targaryen, the gentle king who tried to hold his family together, passes in his sleep. His death is the spark, but the fire has been building for years. And at the centre of that fire are two women, who once whispered secrets to each other in the dark. Rhaenyra is crowned on Dragonstone. Alicent crowns her son Aegon in the Red Keep. The realm splits. The dragons take to the sky. But before the battles, before the blood, before the war that nearly destroys House Targaryen, there is a story about friendship. It is a story about two girls who grew up together, who loved each other, who were turned into enemies by the world they were born into. And that is the tragedy at the heart of the Dance of the Dragons. It is not just a war over a throne. It is a war between people who once knew each other's hearts. The slow pressure of marriage, motherhood, duty and court gossip does not create monsters. It creates ordinary people making terrible choices. Rhaenyra becomes bitter. Alicent becomes fearful. They both become capable of cruelty. But the cruelty does not come from nowhere. It comes from years of watching the person you trusted become someone you no longer recognize. And the war itself, when it comes, is not clean. It is not noble. It is a grinding, brutal conflict fought with fire and blood. But the deepest wounds are not the ones made by dragon claws. They are the ones made by people who used to be friends. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. The story of the Dance of the Dragons often begins with dragons and oaths, with fire and blood, but the real engine of the war was built in quiet rooms, with measured words and patient ambition. And no one understood that better than Otto Hightower. For he was the hand of the king, Otto was a second son from Old Town, a man who had learned that in the Game of Thrones, the sharpest blade is often a well-timed silence. He had risen through the ranks of court, not by force of arms, but by force of presence. He knew every lord's weakness, every lady's ambition, and every servant's secret, and he knew that the true power in King's Landing did not come from dragonfire alone. It came from being the one who whispered into the king's ear when no one else was watching. When Viserys of Ice took the throne, Otto was already there, a steady hand in a court that needed guidance. He became Hand of the King, and from that position, he began to weave a web that would take decades to complete. His first move was simple. He made himself indispensable. He managed the realm's affairs with such efficiency that Viserys came to rely on him for everything from tax policy to succession planning. And in that reliance, Otto found his leverage. But Otto's patience was not just about serving the realm. It was about serving his house. He had a daughter, Alicent, and he saw in her a path to the throne that no dragon could secure. He began to position her close to the king, not as a rival to the queen, but as a comfort, a presence. When Queen Aemma died, Otto was there, offering his daughter's companionship to the grieving king. And when Viserys remarried, it was Alicent he chose. That marriage was Otto's masterpiece. It was not a sudden coup, but a slow, deliberate climb. Every conversation he had with the king was a move in a long succession game. He never pushed too hard, never revealed his hand too early. He simply let the king's trust grow, let his own influence become invisible, and let his blood draw closer to the throne with each passing year. When Rhaenyra was named heir, Otto did not object openly. He did not rage or threaten. Instead, he waited. He knew that the real battle would not be fought at the Great Council, but in the years to come, when the king grew old and the succession grew uncertain. And when Alicent gave birth to a son, Aegon, Otto's patience began to pay its first dividends. He did not need to declare war. He only needed to plant the seed of doubt, to whisper that a daughter's claim was weaker than a son's, to let the court's natural divisions do the work for him. Otto Hightower was not a dragon rider. He did not command armies or wield a sword, but he understood something that many of the Targaryens forgot, that the throne is not won by fire alone. It is won by the people who stand around it, by the oaths that are broken, by the whispers that become truths. And in the end, it was his patience that turned a peaceful reign into a civil war. Because in King's Landing, influence can matter as much as dragonfire. and Otto Hightower had mastered the art of the quiet climb. But the quiet climb does not end at the summit. Once Alicent was queen and Aegon was born, Otto's work shifted from building a path to defending it. He knew that the longer Rhaenyra remained heir, the more entrenched her supporters would become, so he began to cultivate a faction within the court, one that would see Aegon as the rightful king, not because of any law, but because of tradition, because of the simple fact that he was a man. Otto never spoke of usurpation. He spoke of stability. He spoke of the realm's need for a strong king, especially one who could ride a dragon, and he let others draw the conclusions. He also understood that the king's health was a weapon. As Viserys grew weaker, Otto made sure that the small council meetings were held without the king's presence when possible, that decisions were made in his name, but without his direct oversight. He controlled the flow of information to the king, filtering out any news that might strengthen Rhaenyra's position, and he ensured that Alicent was always at the king's bedside, a constant reminder of the new family he had built. But Otto's greatest challenge was not the king or the court, it was the dragons. Rhaenyra had Syrax, and her sons had their own mounts. Daemon had Caraxes. The Blacks commanded a formidable aerial force. Otto could not match that with whispers alone, so he turned to his own house's dragons. He encouraged Aegon to claim Sunfire, a golden beast of terrible beauty. He saw to it that Aemond, the second son, was pushed toward Vhagar, the largest dragon in the world. And when Aemond claimed Vhagar on that stormy night, losing an eye in the process, Otto did not punish him, he praised him, because a one-eyed prince on the back of the Black Dread's last living mount was worth more than a dozen perfect heirs. The dance of the dragons was not inevitable, it was engineered, and Otto Hightower was the engineer. He did not light the match himself, but he stacked the tinder, he cleared the space, and he waited for someone else to strike the spark. That spark came when Viserys finally died, and Otto moved with the speed of a man who had been planning this moment for 20 years. He convened the Green Council in secret, he secured the treasury, he sent ravens to the loyal lords, and he crowned Aegon before Rhaenyra even knew her father was gone. The war that followed was bloody and terrible, but for Otto, it was the final act of a long performance. He had climbed the quiet stairs, and now he stood at the top, looking down at a realm in flames, and he would do whatever it took to keep his family there. Otto Hightower understood the value of patience, of moving pieces across the board, one careful step at a time. But not every piece in King's Landing was content to wait. Some pieces preferred to shatter the board entirely, just to watch the fragments scatter. That piece was Daemon Targaryen. Daemon was Viserys' younger brother, the spare heir, who had been the heir for a time, until Viserys fathered a daughter and then a son, and the line of succession grew tangled like a knot of iron chains. He had been the presumptive heir for years. The brother everyone assumed would one day sit the Iron Throne, but Viserys chose his daughter Rhaenyra instead, and Daemon never quite forgave the slight. Even if he never admitted it aloud, he became the permanent complication, the unpredictable variable that every faction had to account for but could never fully control. His roles shifted like the seasons. He was a rogue prince, exiled from court for his provocations, then recalled when his sword was needed. He was a warrior, commanding the city watch and turning them into a disciplined force, then leading them in battle on Dragonback. He was a husband, married first to a Rhea Royce of the Vale, a match he despised, then later to Laena Velaryon, and finally to his niece Rhaenyra herself. Each marriage was a political move, but also a personal one, and Daemon's loyalties were never simple. He loved Rhaenyra in his own fierce and possessive way, but he also loved chaos. He loved the thrill of the game, the sharp edge of risk, the way power bent when he pushed against it. No faction could fully trust a man who enjoyed chaos. The Greens, the Blacks, the Lords of the Realm. They all knew that Daemon would act according to his own code, and that code was written in fire and blood. He might fight for Rhaenyra one day and challenge her authority the next, He might defend the realm from the Stepstone's pirates, and then turn around and mock the king's peace. He was brilliant and dangerous, and that made him invaluable and impossible in equal measure. Behind the character, the transformation was just as deliberate. Matt Smith, the actor who brought Daemon to life, spent about an hour and a half in makeup and costume each day before stepping onto set. The silver wig, the intricate leather armor, the rings and chains, every detail was chosen to reflect a man who dressed for war and for theatre. Smith studied the character's swagger, the way Daemon carried himself like a predator who knew he was the most dangerous thing in the room. He worked with movement coaches to capture the coiled energy of a man who could snap at any moment. The result was a performance that felt both ancient and alive, a prince who belonged to a lost age of dragons and yet felt utterly present. Daemon's dragon, Caraxes, was a reflection of his rider, long, lean, scarred from battle, with a temper as sharp as a Valyrian steel blade. Their bond was one of the deepest in the era, and when Daemon took to the sky, he was nearly unstoppable. But even Caraxes could not tame the chaos inside his rider. That chaos was Daemon's gift and his curse, the reason he could never be trusted and the reason he could never be ignored. And as the court of King Viserys is settled into its uneasy peace, the prince who loved chaos was already circling, waiting for the moment when the board would tip and the pieces would fall. That moment was coming, carried on the wings of dragons that had not yet chosen their sides, and so the realm held its breath, not knowing which way the wind would blow. The dragons themselves seemed to sense the coming storm, their roars echoing across the Red Keep at odd hours, as if they too were restless. On Dragonstone, Rhaenyra sat in the painted table chamber, her hand resting on the map of Westeros, tracing the lines of allegiance with her fingers. She had been named Heir, but the title was a fragile thing, a promise that could be broken with a single word from the king's mouth. She knew her father's health was failing, knew that the Greens were gathering power like kindling, and she knew that Daemon was both her greatest ally and her greatest liability. She loved him, but she also feared the fire he carried inside him. She had seen what happened when he unleashed it. Meanwhile, in the Tower of the Hand, Otto Hightower continued his quiet work, weaving alliances with the subtlety of a spider. He sent letters to lords across the realm, reminding them of ancient oaths, of the traditions of the Seven Kingdoms, of the danger a woman on the throne could bring. He did not speak of ambition, only of stability. He did not mention his daughter Alicent, only the need for a strong king. And he watched the king's health with the cold patience of a man who had already calculated the date of his death. The dragons grew larger, their scales gleaming in the sun. Vhagar, the oldest and largest, slept in the dragon pit, her breathing like the rumble of distant thunder. She belonged to Lyanna Velaryon then, but soon she would pass to a new rider, and that passing would shift the balance of power forever. The children of the realm played at war, but the real war was already being written in the stars, in the bloodlines, in the whispered conversations that echoed through the stone halls. And every lord, every lady, every knight and maester knew that when the king finally closed his eyes, the dragons would choose their sides, and the realm would burn. Daemon Targaryen's shifting loyalties kept the court guessing. But there was another figure whose influence was built on something far more tangible than political maneuvering. While the Red Keep buzzed with whispers of succession and ambition, a different kind of power was being forged on the open sea. This is where we meet Corlys Velaryon, the legendary sailor known across the known world as the Sea Snake. Corlys was not just a lord of Driftmark, he was an explorer, a trader and a commander whose name became synonymous with adventure and wealth. He commanded the largest fleet in Westeros, and he used it to push beyond the familiar waters of the narrow sea. He sailed farther east than any Westerosi had gone before, past the ruins of old Valyria, into the fabled lands of Karth and the Jade Sea. He returned not with empty tales, but with ships heavy with silk, spices and gold. These voyages made House Velaryon one of the richest families in all of Westeros, rivaling even the Lannisters in their coffers. But wealth alone doesn't explain why the Valyrians mattered so much in the Dance of the Dragons. To understand that, you have to look at the map. Westeros is a long, narrow continent, split by a massive coastline on both east and west. Any kingdom that hopes to move armies, trade goods, or control access to the capital must command the sea. King's Landing itself sits on the coast of Blackwater Bay, vulnerable to any fleet that can block its harbour. In a kingdom divided by sea and coastline, naval power becomes essential, and the Valyrians, with their hundreds of ships and generations of seafaring knowledge, held that power in their hands. There is another layer to their story that often gets overlooked. The Valyrians share Valyrian ancestry without being Targaryens. They came from the same ancient civilization that was destroyed in the Doom, the same bloodline of dragon lords. Their silver hair and purple eyes are not a copy of the royal family. They are a parallel line, a reminder that the Targaryens were not the only Valyrian house to survive. This shared heritage gave the Valyrians a unique status at court, but it also created tension. They were close enough to the throne to be rivals, yet separate enough to be useful allies. Corlys Velaryon built his house's fortune on the back of his own daring, and he used that fortune to secure marriages, alliances, and influence. His wife, Rhaenys Targaryen, was the queen who never was, and their children carried both the dragon blood and the sea salt of Driftmark. When the succession crisis erupted, the sea snake's ships and his dragons became a decisive factor. But before how that played out, it's worth considering the other great power that the Valyrians brought into the conflict. The largest living dragon in the world, a beast so old and so vast that she seemed more like a force of nature than a creature of flesh and bone. That dragon was Vhagar, the ancient she-dragon who had once carried Queen Visenya into battle during Aegon's conquest. By the time of the dance, Vhagar was the largest and most fearsome dragon alive. Her scales the colour of burnished bronze, her wingspan so vast that she could cast a shadow over an entire town. She had been ridden by Baelon Targaryen, then by Rhaenyra Velaryon, and after Rhaenyra's death, she was claimed by Aemond Targaryen, prince whose own ambitions would set the realm ablaze. But Vhagar was more than just a weapon. She was a symbol. To possess her was to hold a piece of the old power, the raw force that had once united Westeros under Dragonfire. And the Valyrians, through Rhaenyra, had briefly held that power. When Rhaenyra died, the dragon passed to the Greens, but the bond between House Velaryon and Vhagar remained a source of pride and resentment. Now consider the strategic position of Driftmark itself. The island of Driftmark sits at the mouth of Blackwater Bay, directly across from Dragonstone and within sight of King's Landing. It is the gateway to the capital. Any fleet sailing from the east must pass within arrowshot of the Velaryon stronghold. High tide. Corlys Velaryon had built his seat not as a castle of stone and steel, but as a palace of marble and coral, a testament to his wealth and his connection to the sea. From its towers, he could watch the trade routes, the warships, and the dragons. He could control who entered the bay and who left. During the dance, this position became a fulcrum. When the blacks and greens clashed, the sea snake's allegiance was not a given. He had been slighted by the crown. His wife passed over for the throne. His blood denied its rightful place. Yet he also had ties to the Greens through his grandchildren. But in the end, it was the memory of his daughter Rhaenyra and the promise of justice for his son Lyonor that swayed him. Corlys Velaryon threw his fleet and his remaining dragon riders behind Rhaenyra, and in doing so, he changed the course of the war. The naval battles of the dance are often overshadowed by the dragon duels, but they were just as decisive. Without the Velaryon fleet, Rhaenyra would never have held King's Landing. The blockade of the gullet, the supply lines, the troop transports, all of it depended on the sea snake's ships, and when the war turned against the blacks, it was Corlys who negotiated the surrender, who tried to salvage what remained of his house and his legacy. He lived to see the end of the dragons, but he never forgot the cost. The Velaryons survived the dance, but their power was diminished. The sea, however, remained, and so did the stories of the sea snake, the man who sailed beyond the maps and brought back the wealth of the world. In the end, the Dance of the Dragons was not just a war of fire and blood. It was a war of tides and currents, and no one understood those better than Corlys Velaryon. Corlys Velaryon had sailed farther than any man alive, and his voyages had filled the coffers of Driftmark with enough gold to rival the Lannisters. But the sea snake's greatest treasure was not a single ship or a mountain of coin. It was the marriage he arranged between his son Laenor and the king's daughter Rhaenyra. That union tied the dragon lords of the Targaryen line to the seafaring nobles of House Velaryon, and it reshaped the political landscape of Westeros. Driftmark itself is the second largest island in the narrow sea, a windswept, salt-scoured place where the tides dictate the rhythm of life. Its seat, High Tide, is not a castle of ancient stone, but a palace of pale white marble, built with the wealth Corlys brought back from his travels. The Velaryons have always been a house of the sea. Their sigil is a seahorse. Their words are the old, the true, the brave. And their blood runs with the salt of 1,000 voyages. But they are also Valyrian, descended from the same Dragonlord families that once ruled the Freehold. Their silver gold hair and purple eyes mark them as kin to the Targaryens, even if their dragons have long since vanished from the world. That shared ancestry became a political weapon. When Corlys married Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, passed over at the Great Council. He brought dragon blood back into his house. Their children, Laenor and Lyanna, were born with the potential to ride dragons, and that potential made them invaluable. Lyonor's betrothal to Rhaenyra was meant to seal an alliance between the crown and the richest house in the realm. It also created a tangled web of relationships that would later become a battlefield of suspicion. Rhaenyra's children by Laenor were dark-haired, dark-eyed, and bore no trace of Velaryon or Targaryen features. In a world where ancestry is everything, that discrepancy became a whisper that grew into a roar. The children were called the Strong Boys, named for their supposed father, Sir Harwin Strong, and in the halls of Driftmark, where the legacy of old Valyria was cherished, those whispers cut deeper than any blade. Laenor himself knew the truth, but he played his part, and the marriage held until it didn't. Meanwhile, Laena Velaryon made her own mark. She claimed Vhagar, the oldest and largest dragon alive, a beast that had carried Queen Visenya during Aegon's conquest. Laena's bond with Vhagar was a statement of power, and when she married Daemon Targaryen, the two of them became a force to be reckoned with. They lived in Pentos for a time, away from the court's scheming, but the pull of Driftmark and its politics never truly faded. The island itself is a fortress of the sea. Its cliffs are riddled with caves where smugglers once hid their cargo, and its harbours are deep enough to anchor the largest fleet in Westeros. The Velaryon Navy is the backbone of the realm's maritime defence, and Corlys used that power to secure his family's place at the table. But the cost of that power was constant vigilance. Every marriage, every birth, every dragon egg that hatched or failed to hatch became a piece on a board where the stakes were the Iron Throne itself. When Laena died in childbirth, her dragon Vhagar was left riderless, and the scramble to claim her would tear the family apart. Lyenor's own death or disappearance left Driftmark without a clear heir. The question of who would inherit the sea snake's legacy became a flashpoint in the growing conflict, and through it all, the Velaryons remained a mirror to the Targaryens, proud, ancient, and bound by blood that was both a blessing and a curse. The marriages between dragon lords and seafaring nobles were not just alliances, they were mergers of power, prestige, and suspicion, in a world where ancestry could be questioned with a glance. The Velaryons learned that even the oldest bloodlines can be tainted by rumour, and as the Dance of the Dragons loomed, the bonds forged at Driftmark would either hold the realm together or shatter it into pieces. That tension between blood and loyalty, between what is seen and what is believed, would soon find its most violent expression in the skies above the God's Eye. where dragons would burn and families would fall. But before that fire, there was the quiet, salt-stained island where the sea met the sky, and where the fate of a dynasty was written in the waves. From the salt-sprayed towers of Driftmark, we turn to something far older, far larger, and far more dangerous than any castle or fleet. We turn to a living creature that has seen more of Westeros than almost any human alive. We turn to Vhagar. If you have seen the show, you have seen her. She is the dragon that looks like a mountain with wings. She is the one whose shadow can swallow an entire village. And she is, without question, the oldest and largest living dragon of the era in which House of the Dragon takes place. But her story does not begin in this century. It begins at the very foundation of the Targaryen dynasty itself. Vhagar was born on Dragonstone, likely sometime before the Conquest. She was one of the 3 dragons that Aegon the Conqueror and his sister Wivs rode when they landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush and began the unification of the 7 kingdoms, while Balerion the Black Dread was the largest, most famous of Aegon's dragons, and Caraxes was the most beautiful. Vhagar was the youngest of the 3, but even as the youngest, she was still a beast of terrifying power. She carried Queen Visenya Targaryen into battle, and together they burned the forces of the Storm King, Argilac the Arrogant, at the Battle of the Last Storm. That was nearly 100 years before the events of House of the Dragon. To put that in perspective, Vhagar was already a fully grown war dragon when she helped conquer the entire continent. By the time we meet her in the show, she has been alive for well over a century. She has outlived Balerion, who died of old age during the reign of King Jaehaerys I. She's outlived Caraxes, who was killed by a scorpion bolt in dawn. She is the last living link to the original invasion, a living fossil of the Age of Conquest, and she has grown. Dragons never stop growing as long as they live, and Vhagar has lived a very long time. By the time of the Dance of the Dragons, she is described as being large enough to swallow a horse whole. Her wings are so vast that when she flies overhead, she can blot out the sun for an entire battlefield. Her hide is scarred from countless battles, and her roar is said to sound like the end of the world. But Vhagar is not just a weapon. She is also a character in her own right, and her history is tied to the changing fortunes of House Targaryen. After Visenya died, Vhagar remained riderless for a time. Then she was claimed by Prince Balon Targaryen, the son of King Jaehaerys and the father of King Viserys I. Balon was a great warrior and a beloved prince, and his bond with Vhagar was a symbol of Targaryen strength. But Balon died young, and Vhagar was once again without a rider. For years, she roamed the skies of Dragonstone, a reminder of the power that had been lost. Then, in the years before the dance, Vhagar found a new rider, Rhaenyra Velaryon, the daughter of Corlys Velaryon and Rhaenys Targaryen, claimed her. This was a remarkable event. Rhaenyra was young, barely a teenager, and Vhagar was the most dangerous dragon in the world. But the bond held, and Rhaenyra became the rider of the oldest living dragon. She flew Vhagar across the narrow sea, to the free cities, and even to the ruins of old Valyria itself. For a time, it seemed as though Vhagar had found peace, but Rhaenyra died in childbirth, and Vhagar was once again alone. And this is where the story takes a darker turn. After Rhaenyra's funeral, Vhagar was claimed by Aemon Targaryen, the second son of King Viserys and Queen Alicent. Aemon was young, fierce, and desperate for a dragon. He had been mocked for years as the only one of his siblings without a mount, and when he saw Vhagar, he saw his chance. He climbed onto her back, spoke the High Valyrian commands, and took to the sky. It was a bold move, and it was also a deeply dangerous one. Vhagar could have killed him. She had killed before, but she accepted him. And from that moment on, Aemon and Vhagar became one of the most fearsome pairs in the entire war. This is the Vhagar in House of the Dragon. She is old, she is scarred, she is temperamental, and she is absolutely terrifying. When Aemon rides her into battle, she is not just a weapon, she is a statement. She is the living proof that the Targaryens were once conquerors, that they once ruled the world from the backs of dragons that could level cities. and she is a reminder that the Age of Dragons is not over, not yet. But Vhagar is also a tragedy. She is the last of her kind in that era, the final survivor of the 3 dragons that changed the world. By the time of the dance, Balerion is dead, Caraxes is dead, and Vhagar is alone. She is the last giant of the Conquest, and she carries the weight of that history wherever she flies. Every time she takes to the air, she is a living monument to a past that no one alive can fully remember. And when she fights with the fury of a creature that has seen empires rise and fall. There is a reason why Vhagar is feared more than any other dragon in the show. It is not just her size, it is her age. She has been alive for so long that she has learned to hate, to fight, and to survive. She has been ridden by conquerors, princes, and warriors. She has burned armies and cities, and she has outlived nearly everyone who ever knew her. She is a creature of immense power and immense loneliness, and that makes her one of the most compelling characters in the entire story. As we watch the Dance of the Dragons unfold, Vhagar will be at the center of some of its most devastating moments. Her presence alone changes the balance of power, and her bond with Aemon will lead to choices that echo through the rest of the war. But for now, it is enough to know that when you see Vhagar on screen, you are looking at the last living remnant of the Age of Conquest. You are looking at a dragon that has been flying over Westeros since before the Iron Throne was built, and you are looking at a creature that, in many ways, defines the entire era of House of the Dragon. From the shadow of Vhagar, we move to the other great dragons of the dance, and to the riders who will shape the fate of a kingdom. Vhagar had been the shadow that fell over battlefields since the days of Aegon the Conqueror. She had carried Visenya through the Conquest, had lived through the reigns of multiple kings, and had grown into something ancient and immense. By the time of House of the Dragon, she was the last living dragon from that original era, a living relic of a time when the Targaryens first united the 7 kingdoms. But dragons are not heirlooms. They are not passed down like castles or crowns or family jewels. When a dragon's rider dies, the bond is severed, and the dragon becomes wild again, waiting. And the next person who tries to claim that dragon must do so with nothing but courage and blood, and the willingness to face a creature that has already killed one rider. That is the dangerous tradition at the heart of dragon riding. It is not inheritance, it is conquest. And no dragon in the era of the Dance of the Dragons demonstrated this more clearly than Vhagar. After her rider, Lion of Velaryon, died, Rhaenyra had claimed Vhagar when she was still a girl, a feat that impressed even the most seasoned dragon lords. She was the daughter of Corlys Velaryon and Rhaenys Targaryen, and she had the blood of both houses flowing in her veins. She bonded with Vhagar at a time when the great dragon had been without a rider for years, and she rode her across the seas and into battle, a fierce and capable woman in her own right. But Rhaenyra's life ended tragically. During a difficult childbirth in Pentos, she chose to die dragonfire rather than suffer a slow, painful end. She commanded Vhagar to burn her, and the dragon obeyed, then flew away, riderless once more. That moment is one of the most haunting in the story. Vhagar, the oldest and largest living dragon, suddenly had no rider, and in the world of Westeros, that meant she was available, but not to just anyone. The tradition is clear. A dragon without a rider is not a prize to be claimed by right of birth or marriage. It is a beast that must be approached, mounted, and bonded with through sheer will. And the next person to try would be a child, a boy barely old enough to understand the weight of what he was doing. That boy was Aemon Targaryen, the second son of King Viserys and Alicent Hightower. He had grown up in the shadow of his older brother Aegon, and he had always wanted a dragon of his own. But the dragons that were available to him as a child were either too small or already claimed. He watched his cousins and siblings ride, and he felt the sting of being dragonless. When Rhaenyra died, Aemon saw his chance. He travelled to Driftmark for her funeral, and there, in the darkness of the night, he walked out onto the beach where Vhagar had settled. The act of claiming a dragon after its previous rider dies is never safe. It is a moment of courage, grief, and political upheaval all at once. Aemon approached Vhagar with nothing but a rope and his own determination. The dragon was enormous, her scales like ancient armour, her eyes the colour of burning embers. She could have killed him in an instant, but Aemon spoke to her in High Valyrian, the language of the Dragon Lords, and he climbed onto her back. Vhagar resisted at first, shaking the ground, but the bond took hold. By the time the sun rose, Aemon was her rider. That act changed everything. It was not a simple inheritance. It was a theft in the eyes of Rhaenyra's faction. Rhaenyra's daughters, Baela and Rhaenyra, had expected to claim Vhagar themselves, or at least to have a say in who rode their mother's dragon. But dragons do not care about family claims. They choose, and Vhagar chose Aemon. The result was a violent confrontation between the children of the two rival branches of House Targaryen. A fight that ended with Aemon losing an eye and the seeds of a deeper hatred being sown. The tradition of claiming a dragon after its previous rider dies is not a ceremony. It is a raw personal test. It reveals character. Aemon's boldness, his willingness to risk death, his hunger for power, all of it was laid bare in that single night. And Vhagar, the great beast who had flown with Visenya and carried Rhaenyra, became the instrument of a new generation's ambition. The dragon did not care about politics. She only cared about the rider who proved worthy. This is the truth about dragons in the world of ice and fire. They are not tools to be passed from hand to hand. They are living beings with their own wills, and the bond between rider and dragon is forged in moments of extreme risk. The act of claiming a riderless dragon is one of the most dangerous things a Targaryen can do, and it often reshapes the political landscape in ways that no one can predict. In the case of Vhagar, it gave the Greens their most powerful weapon, and it set the stage for the violence that would tear the family apart. The bond between Rhaenyra and Vhagar had been strong, but it was not eternal. When Rhaenyra died, the dragon waited, and when Aemon reached out, Vhagar accepted him. That is the nature of these creatures. They are not loyal to a house or a name. They are loyal to the individual who earns their trust. And in a world where dragons are the ultimate symbols of power, that loyalty can change everything. From that moment on, Vhagar was Aemon's, and the story of the Dance of the Dragons would be shaped by the choices made on that dark beach at Driftmark, where a boy claimed a dragon and set a war in motion. Vhagar was not the only dragon whose reputation preceded her. There was another, smaller in scale, but no less terrifying in presence, and he belonged to the most dangerous man in the Seven Kingdoms, Caraxes, the bloodworm, the red monster. Even among dragons, Caraxes was considered strange, and that strangeness made him unforgettable. If you saw Caraxes from a distance, the first thing you would notice was his colour, a deep angry red darker than blood, almost the shade of dried rust. But the second thing, the thing that made maesters and dragon handlers pause, was his shape. Caraxes was unnaturally long, his neck stretched out far beyond what seemed normal, and his tail was equally elongated, giving him a serpentine appearance that other dragons did not share. When he flew, he did not glide with the broad, steady wing beats of Vhagar or the elegant arcs of Syrax. Caraxes moved with a coiled, almost snake-like tension, his body writhing through the air as if he were swimming rather than flying. It was an unsettling sight, and it earned him the nickname the Bloodworm long before the Dance of the Dragons began. But his appearance was only part of the story. Caraxes had a voice that matched his looks. When he roared, the sound was not the deep, rumbling thunder of older dragons. It was a high, piercing shriek, something between a scream and a whistle, and it carried for miles. Soldiers who heard that sound on the battlefield often described it as a feeling more than a noise, a pressure in the chest that made it hard to breathe. The shriek of Caraxes meant that Daemon Targaryen was coming, and nothing good followed in his wake. And that brings us to the most important truth about dragons in this era. Their size mattered, yes. Vhagar was the largest, and that gave her an undeniable advantage. But dragon personalities mattered just as much. Some dragons were lazy, some were stubborn. Some were fiercely loyal to a single rider and would accept no other. Caraxes was aggressive. He was restless, quick to anger and eager to fight. He did not need to be provoked. He seemed to enjoy the violence of battle in a way that other dragons did not. This made him unpredictable, and unpredictability on a battlefield is often more dangerous than raw power. It should come as no surprise, then, that Caraxes was bonded to Daemon Targaryen. The prince and his dragon were a matched pair in temperament. Daemon was impulsive, hot-blooded, and always looking for a fight. Caraxes was the same. When Daemon rode into battle on the back of the bloodworm, there was no hesitation, no careful calculation. They attacked with the same ferocious energy, the same disregard for personal safety. It was as if the dragon had absorbed something of his rider. Or perhaps it was the other way around. Either way, the bond between them was one of the most dangerous combinations in the entire Targaryen dynasty. Caraxes had already proven himself in war, long before the Dance of the Dragons began. He had fought in the Stepstones alongside Daemon, burning pirate fleets and coastal fortresses with a precision that spoke to years of practice. He had been ridden in tournaments and displays of power, his shrieking roar announcing the presence of the Crown Prince wherever he went. And he had been present at some of the most tense political moments of Viserys' reign, a silent reminder that Daemon was never truly powerless, no matter how many times he was exiled or stripped of titles. But there was something else about Caraxes that set him apart. He was not just aggressive, he was intelligent. Dragons are not simple beasts, and Caraxes demonstrated a cunning that surprised even seasoned dragon handlers. He knew when to strike and when to pull back. He understood the rhythm of battle in a way that suggested a deeper awareness. This made him not just a weapon, but a partner. Daemon did not simply command Caraxes, he worked with him, and that partnership made both of them far more dangerous than they would have been alone. The Red Monster was also one of the few dragons who had faced another dragon in combat and survived. That experience, the memory of fighting one of his own kind, had left him even more wary and even more aggressive. He did not trust other dragons. He saw them as rivals, not kin. And in the coming war, that distrust would shape the course of battles in ways that no one could fully predict. So when you think of Caraxes, do not think of him as just another dragon. Think of him as a living embodiment of everything that made Daemon Targaryen so feared. The long serpentine neck, the piercing shriek, the restless, coiled energy that never quite settled. He was a creature of war, shaped by years of conflict, and bonded to a prince who could not sit still. Together, they were a storm waiting to break. And storms, as the maesters would later write, do not announce their arrival, they simply appear. From Caraxes, the Red Monster with his serpentine neck and blood-curdling roar, we turn to a dragon of a very different temperament. Syrax, the golden she-dragon of Rhaenyra Targaryen, is not a creature of the battlefield, at least not at first. She is something more complicated, a living symbol of legitimacy, a gilded extension of her rider's claim, and a burden that grows heavier with every flight over King's Landing. Syrax is named after an old Valyrian goddess, a detail that immediately sets her apart. Where Caraxes earned his nickname through sheer terror, Syrax is named for divinity. She is a dragon of yellow and gold scales, with wings that catch the sun like molten metal. Rhaenyra first claimed her as a young girl, long before the succession crisis tore the realm apart. The bond between them is intimate, forged in the dragon pit and in the skies above the capital. But that bond is also public. In a world where Targaryen power is measured by the dragons they ride, Syrax becomes a walking, or rather flying, statement of Rhaenyra's status. Think about what it means to be the heir to the Iron Throne in an age when dragons are still plentiful. Every time Rhaenyra mounts Syrax and soars above the city, she is performing an ancient ritual. The image of Aegon riding ruler is the oldest symbol of Targaryen authority, stretching back to Aegon, the Conqueror himself. When the small folk look up and see a golden dragon circling the Red Keep, they see not just a princess, but a queen in waiting. The dragon reinforces the claim. It says, without words, that Rhaenyra carries the blood of old Valyria, that she is worthy of the throne, because she commands a beast that could burn the realm to ash. But that is the ceremonial side. The burden comes from the other side of the coin. Syrax is not a war dragon in the way Vhagar or Caraxes are. She has never seen a true battle. Rhaenyra uses her for processions, for diplomatic displays, for the occasional hunt. The dragon is a tool of statecraft, a piece of living jewelry that proves the wearer's power. Yet the dance of the dragons will demand that every dragon be turned into a weapon, and that is where the horror begins. The contrast is stark. On one hand, you have the beautiful, peaceful image of Rhaenyra and Syrax flying over the Dragonstone cliffs at sunset, a scene of serene authority. On the other hand, you have the reality of what dragons do in war. They are not just symbols, they are engines of mass destruction. The same golden scales that gleam in the sun can be splattered with blood. The same wings that catch the wind can cast shadows over burning villages. Rhaenyra knows this. She has seen what Vhagar can do, what Caraxes can do, and she knows that if she ever unleashes Syrax in earnest, the burden of that decision will be heavier than any crown. This is the tension at the heart of Rhaenyra's story. Her dragon is her greatest asset and her greatest vulnerability. Syrax makes her look like a queen, but she also makes her a target. Every enemy knows that if they can harm the dragon, they can break the rider, and every ally knows that the dragon is the ultimate trump card, one that once played cannot be taken back. So Syrax waits. She basks in the sun, she eats sheep, she flies lazy circles around the castle. But the war is coming, and when it does, the golden dragon will have to choose: remain a symbol or become a weapon. That choice is Rhaenyra's burden, and it is one that will define her reign and her soul. And as we consider the weight of that bond, we begin to see a pattern across all the dragon riders of this era. Each dragon reflects something about its rider. Caraxes is Daemon's fury, Vhagar is Rhaenyra's legacy, Syrax is Rhaenyra's hope and her fear. The dragons are not just pets or weapons, they are mirrors, and in the coming storm, those mirrors will shatter. And that brings us to Vhagar, the oldest and largest of the living dragons at the time of the dance. She was once the mount of Visenya Targaryen, sister wife of Aegon the Conqueror, and she carries the weight of centuries. After Laena Velarion's death, Vhagar was claimed by Aemon Targaryen, a boy driven by a need to prove himself. The pairing of Vhagar and Aemon is a study in ambition and recklessness. Where Syrax is a symbol of legitimacy, Vhagar is a symbol of raw, overwhelming power. She is a living weapon of mass destruction, and Aemon's willingness to use her without restraint sets the stage for some of the most devastating moments of the war. Consider the difference in scale. Syrax is large, but Vhagar is a continent of muscle and scale, her wings blotting out the sun over entire armies. When Aemon mounts her, he is not just riding a dragon. He is riding a legend, a creature that has seen generations of Targaryens rise and fall, and that legacy weighs on him, perhaps even more than the crown weighs on Rhaenyra. For Aemon, Vhagar is the answer to every slight, every mockery he endured as a boy without a dragon. She is his vengeance given form. Then there is Sunfire, the golden dragon of Aegon II, a creature of almost obscene beauty. Where Syrax is gold, Sunfire is described as the most beautiful dragon ever seen, with scales that shimmer like beaten gold and flames that burn a pale, almost white heat. Aegon II is not a warrior king. He is a pleasure seeker, and Sunfire reflects that. The dragon is a status symbol, a piece of art, a companion for feasts and hunts. But the war will force Sunfire to become something else entirely. The bond between Aegon and Sunfire is one of the most tragic in the dance, because it is tested to the breaking point. Sunfire will be wounded, scarred, and driven to the edge of death, and yet the dragon's loyalty to its rider never wavers. That loyalty becomes a mirror for Aegon's own stubbornness, his refusal to yield even when the realm crumbles around him. And we cannot forget the dragons of the younger generation. Dreamfire, ridden by Rhaenyra Targaryen, is a dragon of pale blue and silver, gentle in temperament but capable of terrible destruction. Helena herself is a melancholic figure, and Dreamfire seems to share that sorrow. Then, there are the wild dragons of Dragonstone, Sheepstealer, Grey Ghost, and the Cannibal, creatures that have never known a rider, living symbols of the untamed power that the Targaryens once commanded, but can no longer control. Each of these dragons tells a story, not just of the rider who mounts them, but of the realm itself. The Dance of the Dragons is not merely a war between two factions. It is a war between the very natures of these beasts, and as the battles unfold, the skies will fill with fire, and the mirrors will indeed shatter, leaving only ash and memory. There is a dragon in this story who never needed to be the biggest, to be the most dangerous. While Syrax carried Rhaenyra as a symbol of her claim, another dragon carried a woman who had been denied a throne entirely. Her name is Meleys, the Red Queen, and she belonged to Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. Meleys is a creature of scarlet and copper. Her scales are deep, burnished red that catches the light like a living flame. Her horns are like polished brass, and her wings are vast but not heavy. She is built for speed, not brute force. In the skies of Westeros, she was considered the swiftest dragon of her time, capable of outrunning even the great Vhagar over short distances. That speed is not just a curiosity. In dragon combat, it can be nearly as decisive as size. A larger dragon may have more raw power, but a faster dragon can strike, turn and escape before the opponent can bring its full strength to bear. Meleys could fly circles around slower beasts, and her rider Rhaenys knew exactly how to use that advantage. Rhaenys herself was once the leading candidate for the Iron Throne. At the Great Council of 101 years after Aegon's conquest, she was passed over in favour of her cousin Viserys. Simply because she was a woman, the Lords of Westeros chose a man over a woman. Even though Rhaenys had the stronger blood claim through her father, she became a footnote in the succession, a princess who might have been queen, and yet she did not fade into obscurity. She claimed Meleys, a dragon that had once belonged to her mother, Alyssa Targaryen, and the bond between them became something legendary. When you look at Meleys, you are looking at a road not taken. If Rhaenys had been crowned, the entire Dance of the Dragons might never have happened. Instead, she became a reminder of what could have been. Her dragon is not the largest, not the oldest, but it is the fastest. And that speed is a kind of power that the realm often overlooks. In a world where dragons are measured by their size and their rider's status, Meleys proves that agility and cunning can match raw might. Rhaenys and Meleys together represent a different vision of Targaryen rule, one that is swift, decisive, and unburdened by the weight of expectation. The Red Queen is a dragon of scarlet fire and copper wings, and she carries a woman who knows exactly what it means to be passed over. That knowledge makes them both dangerous in their own quiet way. And as the realm edges closer to war, the speed of Meleys will become a factor that no one can afford to ignore, because in the end, the dragon that can turn fastest is often the one that lands the first blow. And when the war finally came, that first blow was struck at Rook's Rest. It was there that Rhaenys and Meleys faced the ultimate test of speed against size. The Greens had laid a trap, luring Rhaenyra's forces into a false sense of security. But Rhaenys, ever the strategist, saw through the ruse. She did not charge blindly. Instead, she used Meleys' speed to scout ahead, to assess the enemy's position before committing to battle. When she saw Vhagar, the largest dragon in the world, and Sunfire, the golden dragon of Aegon II, she knew she was outmatched in raw power. But she also knew that Meleys could outmaneuver them both, so she struck with precision. Meleys dove from the clouds, her scarlet scales blending with the dawn light, and she caught Sunfire off guard. The golden dragon was wounded, torn from the sky by a blur of copper and fire. For a moment, it seemed as though Rhaenys might win, but then Vhagar turned, and the wheat of age and size began to tell. Meleys was fast, but Vhagar was relentless. The two dragons clashed in a storm of flame and fury, and the Red Queen fought with a ferocity that belied her smaller frame. She bit and clawed, using her speed to avoid Vhagar's jaws. But in the end, the older dragon's sheer mass proved too much. Meleys fell, and Rhaenys fell with her. Yet even in defeat, they left a mark. Sunfear was crippled, Vhagar was wounded, and the Greens lost their momentum. The Battle of Rook's Rest became a turning point, not because the Blacks won, but because Rhaenys and Meleys showed what speed and courage could achieve against overwhelming odds. They proved that a dragon need not be the largest to change the course of a war. And in the years that followed, the story of the Red Queen became a legend whispered by those who remembered what might have been. Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, and Meleys, the swiftest dragon of her age, were gone, but their example endured. The realm learned that speed is not just a weapon, it is a statement. It says that even when you're overlooked, even when you're denied your rightful place, you can still strike with a force that echoes through history. The Dance of the Dragons was a war of giants, but it was also a war of moments. And the moment Meleys turned in the sky, faster than any dragon had a right to be, was a moment that no one forgot. It was a reminder that power comes in many forms, and that the dragon you underestimate is often the one that burns you first. Meleys was fast, and speed in a dragon fight is almost as good as size. But Meleys was only one dragon, and the era of House of the Dragon is defined by something the later Game of Thrones era never had: a true abundance of dragons, 17 of them to be precise, all alive at roughly the same time. That is not a small number. That is a number that changes everything about how power works. To understand why this period holds so many dragons, you have to look at the timeline. By the time of the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryens have been in Westeros for about 100 years. They brought 5 dragons from Valyria, and over the decades, those dragons laid eggs. Some hatched, some grew, and a few were claimed by new riders. The later Game of Thrones era, by contrast, has only 3 dragons, and they are all young. The difference is not just in quantity, it is in the entire structure of politics and war. 17 dragons means 17 flying weapons. But each one comes with a rider, and each rider has a temper, a loyalty, and a claim. That is the terrible problem. A dragon is not a sword you can hand to anyone. It bonds with a specific person, often for life, and that bond is intimate, dangerous, and politically decisive. When you have 17 dragons, you have 17 independent power centers, each one capable of burning a castle or turning a battle. And because each dragon is tied to a rider, the rider's ambitions become the dragon's ambitions. That is how a family conflict becomes a war that destroys the family. Take Vhagar, the oldest and largest. She was ridden by Lynna Velaryon, then claimed by Aemon Targaryen. That single transition shifted the balance of power overnight. Vhagar alone could defeat any other dragon in a one-on-one fight, but she was not a neutral force. She was Aemon's dragon, and Aemon was a prince with a grudge, so the military advantage of having Vhagar was enormous, but the succession risk was just as enormous. Whoever controlled Vhagar controlled the sky, and that meant they could enforce their claim to the throne with fire. Caraxes, the red monster with the long neck, was Daemon's dragon. Daemon was unpredictable, ambitious, and willing to take risks. Caraxes reflected that. He was aggressive, fast, and feared even by other dragons. That gave Daemon a military edge, but it also made him a threat to anyone who tried to rein him in. The succession crisis was not just about who sat the Iron Throne. It was about who could command the loyalty of the most dangerous dragons. Syrax was Rhaenyra's dragon, golden and powerful, but Rhaenyra was not a warrior. She used Syrax as a symbol of her legitimacy, a living proof of her Targaryen blood. That worked for a while, but it also made her a target. When you have a dragon, everyone knows you have power, but they also know you have a weakness. If your dragon is injured, or if you cannot ride it into battle, your enemies will exploit that. Meleys, the Red Queen, was fast and fierce, but she was ridden by Rhaenys, a woman who had been passed over for the throne. That history gave Meleys a political weight beyond her firepower. When Rhaenys chose to fight, She was not just fighting for Rhaenyra, she was fighting for her own claim, her own legacy. And that is the irony of 17 dragons. The Targaryens thought more dragons meant more power, but it actually meant more chaos. Every dragon was a potential rival, every rider a potential traitor. The central irony is this: Targaryen power became too abundant to control. The dragons were supposed to unite the family, but they did the opposite. They multiplied the number of people who could challenge the throne. They made every succession dispute a potential war, and they ensured that when the war came, it would be fought with fire and blood, not just swords and arrows. By the time the Dance of the Dragons is over, most of those 17 dragons will be dead. The few that survive will be wild or too small to matter. The Targaryens will never again have that many dragons, and that is the real tragedy. They had everything they needed to rule forever, but they could not stop themselves from using it against each other. So when you look at the later Game of Thrones era, with Daenerys' 3 dragons, you are seeing the echo of a lost age. The Targaryens of House of the Dragon had 17 dragons, and they still could not hold the realm together. That is the terrible problem at the heart of the story, and it is a problem that no amount of fire can solve. Now, if you think 17 dragons sounds like a lot, wait until you hear about the one dragon that was never ridden, the one that lived in the depths of the dragon pit and refused to bond with anyone. That dragon had a name and a story, and it tells us something about what happens when even the dragons themselves decide they have had enough. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. 17 dragons, each one a living weapon, a symbol of power, and a risk that could tip the entire realm into chaos. But what makes a dragon choose a rider? And what happens when that bond is broken? The connection between dragon and rider is one of the most intimate and mysterious relationships in all of Westeros. And it's not as simple as just climbing onto a saddle. You might assume that anyone with Targaryen blood can claim a dragon, and to some extent that's true. The dragon lords of old Valyria bred their mounts to respond to their bloodline, and that genetic link has persisted for centuries. But Valyrian blood is not a guarantee of safety. In fact, it's more like a key that opens a door, but what waits on the other side is still a wild, unpredictable creature with a mind of its own. We've seen riders burned, thrown, or simply rejected. The bond is not automatic. It has to be earned, and sometimes it never forms at all. When a rider does bond with a dragon, the connection becomes deeply personal. The dragon learns its rider's voice, their scent, their moods, and the rider learns to read the dragon's body language, the subtle shift of wings, the low rumble of a growl. This private understanding is what makes dragon riding possible. But it also creates a vulnerability. If a rider is lost, the dragon may become withdrawn, aggressive, or even unclaimable for years. And if a dragon dies, the rider often suffers a kind of grief that can break them. But the bond is not just private. It becomes a public display of authority every time a rider issues a command in High Valyrian. Those ancient words, spoken aloud, turn an intimate partnership into a spectacle of power. When Daemon shouts at Caraxes or Rhaenyra calls to Syrax, the entire court hears it. The language itself is a reminder of old Valyria, of the dragon lords who once ruled an empire, and the command is not just for the dragon. It's for everyone watching. It says, "I am bonded to this beast. I am the one who controls the fire." This public authority is crucial in a war where dragons decide battles. But it also means that losing a rider or a dragon can instantly alter the balance of power. One death, one failed bond, one dragon that refuses a new rider, and the entire strategic landscape shifts. The Dance of the Dragons is not just a war of armies. It is a war of these fragile, terrifying partnerships. And every bond, no matter how strong, carries the seed of its own destruction. So when you see a dragon and rider together, remember that what looks effortless flight is actually the result of a deep, dangerous trust. and that trust can be broken in an instant, leaving the realm to wonder who will be brave or foolish enough to reach for the reins next. And yet, history is filled with those who tried and failed. The most famous example might be the dragon Silverwing, who bonded with Queen Alazan, but later refused to accept any other rider after her death. For decades, Silverwing remained riderless, a living monument to a bond that could not be replicated. Then there is the case of the dragon sheep-stealer, who was never truly tamed by any Targaryen, only by a common girl named Nettles, who won his loyalty through patience and offerings of mutton, not through blood or ancient words. Her bond was a stark reminder that the dragons are not mere tools of the crown. They are individuals with their own preferences, their own grudges, and their own capacity for love. But what of the dragons that never bond at all? Some hatchlings are born weak or too wild, and they live their entire lives in the dragon pit, never knowing the sky with a rider on their back. Others, like the cannibal of Dragonstone, actively reject all human contact, feeding on the carcasses of lesser dragons and the foolish who approach too close. The cannibal was never claimed, not by any Targaryen, not by any dragon lord of old. He remained a law unto himself, a dark omen circling the volcano, a reminder that the bond is a choice, and the dragon always has the final say. This is why the Dance of the Dragons is so devastating. When riders fall, their dragons do not simply become available for the next claimant. They grieve, they rage, they may turn feral, or they may flee to the wilds, never to be seen again. The dragon Vermithor, once the mount of King Jaehaerys, went years without a rider after his death, and when a new rider finally attempted to claim him during the dance, the result was a massacre. The dragon remembered his old bond, and he would not be forced into a new one. That memory, that loyalty, is both the strength and the weakness of dragonkind. So when you watch the skies of Westeros, understand that every dragon you see is carrying not just a rider, but a story of trust, of risk, of a bond that could shatter at any moment, and the realm holds its breath, knowing that the next dragon to be claimed might save a kingdom or burn it to ash. That bond between dragon and rider is one of the most intimate relationships in all of Westeros, and it's built on something deeper than trust alone. It's built on language. When Daemon murmurs to Caraxes before a flight, or when Rhaenyra speaks to Syrax in a low rolling cadence, they're not using the common tongue of the Seven Kingdoms. They're speaking High Valyrian, the ancient tongue of the Dragon Lords, who ruled a continent that sank beneath the sea 400 years ago. In the show, that language becomes a kind of ritual sound, a sonic marker that separates the Targaryens from everyone else. You hear it in the throne room when Viserys issues a formal decree. You hear it in the dragon pit when a rider commands her mount to descend. You hear it in private moments between family members. A few whispered words that carry the weight of an entire lost empire. Is not just a code or a secret handshake, it's a declaration. We are not like you. We speak the words of old Valyria, and that makes us different. What's fascinating is that this language, for all its ancient weight, was never actually spoken in history. High Valyrian, as we hear it on screen, is a constructed language, built from scratch by a linguist named David J. Peterson. He created it for Game of Thrones years ago, and for House of the Dragon, he expanded it further, adding new vocabulary for dragon commands, for courtly rituals, for the specific titles and ceremonies that define this earlier era. So when an actor recites a line in High Valyrian, they're not reviving a dead tongue. They're performing a language that was born in a linguist's notebook and then brought to life on set. That performance takes work. The actors didn't just show up and start rattling off Valyrian phrases. They were trained in pronunciation, drilled on the exact vowel lengths and consonant clusters that make the language sound both alien and musical. For dragon commands, the words had to be crisp enough that the visual effects team could sync the dragon's response to the sound. For family exchanges, the tone had to feel intimate, almost private. For ceremonial moments, like a funeral or a coronation, The rhythm had to carry the gravity of something ancient. The actors learned to shape their mouths around sounds that don't exist in English, all so that the audience would hear something that feels older than the show itself. And that's exactly the point. The Targaryens use High Valyrian, not just because it's practical, but because it reinforces their identity. They are the blood of the dragon, the last surviving Dragonlord family from a civilization that collapsed in fire and catastrophe. By speaking the language of that lost empire, they remind everyone, including themselves, that they are not truly part of Westeros. They rule it, but they are not of it. The language is a quiet, constant reminder that the Targaryens see themselves as separate, as superior, as something that belongs to a world that no longer exists. That separation becomes more than just a cultural quirk. It shapes how they govern, how they marry, how they wage war. And as the succession crisis deepens, that sense of difference will become both a source of strength and a dangerous blind spot. The same language that binds them together also isolates them from the lords and ladies who speak the common tongue and who may not be as willing to follow a ruler who seems to belong to a different age. That isolation, that linguistic barrier, becomes a political weapon as much as a cultural marker. When Rhaenyra stands before the lords of the realm and delivers a speech in the common tongue, she's making a choice to bridge that gap, to show that she can speak to them as equals. But when her half-brother Aegon is crowned, the ceremony is conducted almost entirely in High Valyrian, a deliberate signal that his claim rests on the old blood, not on the will of the people. The language becomes a tool of legitimacy, a way to say, I am not chosen by you, I am chosen by the gods of old Valyria, and that distinction matters. Because the lords of Westeros are watching, they hear the difference, they feel the distance, and some of them begin to wonder if a ruler who speaks the tongue of a dead empire can truly understand the living realm they govern. Then there are the dragons themselves. The commands in High Valyrian are not just words. They are sonic keys that unlock a dragon's response. Each dragon seems to have its own temperament, and the riders learn to modulate their Valyrian accordingly. A sharp, guttural command for Vhagar, the ancient war beast. A softer, lilting phrase for Syrax, who is more companion than weapon. The language adapts to the bond, and the bond shapes the language. When Daemon shouts Dracarys in the heat of battle, it's not just a word, it's a release, a final syllable that triggers fire. And the audience feels that power because the language itself has been built to carry it. But perhaps the most telling use of High Valyrian is in moments of grief. At the funeral of a fallen dragon or a lost family member, the prayers are intoned in that ancient tongue. The words are heavy with centuries of mourning, and they remind us that the Targaryens have been saying in this language for generations. When Rhaenyra whispers a Valyrian phrase over the body of her child, the sound is raw, private, and utterly alien to the Westerosi around her. In that moment, the language is not a tool of power or politics. It is a vessel for sorrow, a connection to a past that no one else can share, and that, more than any throne or crown, is what makes the Targaryens truly alone. And so, from the ritual sound of High Valyrian, we turn to another language spoken at court, one that needs no words at all, a language of silk and wool, of brooches and hemlines, of the colours that suddenly began to divide the Red Keep into two camps long before any sword was drawn. In the years before the Dance of the Dragons, the court of King Viserys I was a place of careful ceremony. Everyone knew that the king had named his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir, but everyone also knew that his second wife, Queen Alicent, had given him sons. The question of succession hung in the air like smoke from a candle, invisible until you breathed it in. And then, at a tournament held to celebrate the king's name day, the question became visible. Queen Alicent entered the royal box wearing a dress of deep green. It was not a casual choice. Green was the colour of House Hightower, her father's house, and it was also the colour worn by the Faith of the Seven in its more militant expressions. But more than that, the green dress was a signal. In the Targaryen court, The traditional colour of the royal house was black, the colour of their banners and their dragons. By wearing green, Alicent was making a statement. She was not simply the queen consort, she was the leader of a faction, a rival centre of power. From that moment, the court began to split along a colour line. Those who supported Queen Alicent and her son Aegon the Elder began to wear green. Those who remained loyal to Princess Rhaenyra and her claim wore black. It was not an official decree, but a social code that spread through the castle like a whispered secret. At feasts, you could glance around the hall and see who sat with whom by the shades of their garments. A lord who arrived in a green doublet was making a public declaration. A lady who pinned a black brooch to her gown was doing the same. The colours became a kind of uniform, a way to show allegiance without saying a word. And it was not just clothing. The servants began to notice which chambers were decorated with green tapestries and which with black. The gold cloaks of the city watch, nominally neutral, started to favour one side or the other in subtle ways. The maesters, too, had their preferences. Though they were careful to keep their chains hidden, the conflict began not with armies marching, but with 1,000 small choices. Which door you entered, which bench you sat on, which cup you raised when the king's health was toasted, the greens and the blacks. Those names stuck because they were simple, visual, and impossible to ignore. They turned a family dispute into a kingdom-wide choice of banners. Every lord in Westeros, from the mightiest warden to the smallest landed knight, eventually had to decide. Would they wear green or black? And the decision was not abstract. It meant choosing which side of the table to sit on at a wedding, which daughter to betroth to which son, which tax collector to pay first. The colours seeped into every corner of life. What began as a queen's dress and a princess's pride became the emblem of a civil war. The greens and the blacks would soon fly over castles and armies, over dragons and battlefields. But in those early days before the first blood was spilled, the war was fought in cloth and ceremony, in the tilt of a chin and the cut of a sleeve. It was a war of whispers and glances, and the colours told the whole story. The greens and the blacks, however, were not the only colours that mattered in those days. There was also the white of the Kingsguard, the silver gold of Targaryen hair, and the deep red of dragon scales that caught the sunlight over the dragon pit. But the division ran deeper than any die could reach. It was about blood, about oaths, and about the terrifying truth that a king's word could be undone by a king's death. Consider the small council chamber where the lords sat in their velvet and satin. Lord Lionel Strong, the hand of the king, wore brown and leather, a man of the Riverlands who tried to stay above the fray. But his sons were another matter. Sir Harwin Strong, the commander of the city watch, was said to be close to Princess Rhaenyra, and his loyalty was whispered to be more than professional. His brother Larys Clubfoot, the master of whisperers, moved through the shadows like a spider, and no one could be sure which colour he truly favoured. The small council itself became a stage for the silent war. When the queen entered, her ladies-in-waiting trailing behind her, like a flock of green songbirds, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. When the princess arrived, her own retinue in black and red, the air grew thick with tension. And what of the king himself? Viserys I, once a vigorous man, was now ailing, his body racked by the slow decay of the flesh. He saw the colours, of course. He was not blind, but he chose to look away, to pretend that the green and black were merely fashions, not factions. He would sit on the Iron Throne, his crown heavy on his brow, and watch his wife and his daughter exchange pleasantries that cut like Valyrian steel. He heard the whispers in the corridors, the rumours of plots and counterplots, but he did nothing. He hoped, perhaps, that if he ignored the division long enough, it would heal itself. He was wrong. The colours spread beyond the Red Keep. In the streets of King's Landing, merchants began to stock more green fabric or more black, depending on which side they expected to win. Seamstresses grew rich, stitching the badges of allegiance onto doublets and gowns. Taverns became known as greenhouses or black houses, and a man could be beaten for wearing the wrong colour in the wrong part of the city. The faith of the Seven, ever watchful, began to preach sermons that hinted at the righteousness of one claim over another. The High Septon, a man of ambition, saw the green as a sign of divine favour, for green was the colour of spring and renewal, of the father's mercy and the mother's love. But the black was the colour of night, of the stranger, of death. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. And then there were the dragons, the great beasts that had made House Targaryen supreme for a century. They too became part of the colour war. Rhaenyra's dragon, Syrax, was a golden yellow, almost the colour of the sun. But the queen's children rode dragons of darker hues. Aegon's sunfire was a shimmering gold, but Aemon's Vhagar was a brute of bronze and green, the oldest and largest dragon alive. When Vhagar flew over the city, her shadow was a greenish black that seemed to swallow the light. The people would look up and see that shadow, and they would know that the war was coming, that it was only a matter of time before the colours became fire and blood. So the greens and the blacks prepared. They gathered allies, they wrote letters, they made promises they could not keep. The lords of the realm received ravens bearing seals of green wax or black, and they had to choose. Some chose out of loyalty, some out of fear, some out of greed, but all chose. And the colours that had once been a queen's fashion statement became the banners under which dragons would die and kingdoms would burn. The dance of the dragons had not yet begun in earnest, but its first steps had been taken in silk and wool, in the silent language of a court divided against itself. The story of the greens and the blacks is not just a fantasy conflict, it is a mirror held up to the real world, and the reflection is uncomfortably clear. George R.R. Martin did not invent the dance of the dragons from pure imagination. He looked back at English history, at a period known as the Anarchy, and he found the same bitter question that tears families apart. Can a daughter inherit a throne when a male rival claims it by right of birth? In the 12th century, King Henry I of England named his daughter Matilda as his heir. He made his barons swear oaths to support her, but when Henry died, his nephew Stephen seized the crown instead. The result was nearly 2 decades of civil war, with castles changing hands, towns burning, and the countryside ravaged by armies that could not decide who was the true sovereign. The anarchy, historians call it, because for a time there was no clear law, only violence. Now listen to the dance of the dragons. King Viserys I names his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir. The lords of Westeros swear oaths, but when Viserys dies, his son by a second marriage, Aegon II, is crowned by his mother Alicent and her faction. The same pattern unfolds. A daughter set aside for a male relative, a war that drags on for years. The question of whether a woman can rule is not a fantasy problem. It is a real one that has been asked in courts across centuries, and the echoes do not stop there. The Wars of the Roses, that long 15th century struggle between the houses of Lancaster and York, also shaped the dance. 2 branches of the same family fighting over a crown, each side with its own symbol, its own claim, its own supporters willing to die for a name. In Westeros, the greens and the blacks. In England, the red rose and the white rose. The details differ, but the engine is the same. A succession crisis that no one can resolve without blood. What makes the dance of the dragons feel so believable, even with dragons and magic, is that the conflict is rooted in something every culture has faced. Who inherits when the ruler dies without a clear answer? The laws are written, but the powerful interpret them to suit their ambition. The oaths are sworn, but they are broken when convenience demands it. The story of Rhaenyra and Aegon is not just a story about Targaryens. It is a story about how fragile any system of inheritance becomes when the person at the top leaves a question mark instead of a command. And that question mark, that uncertainty, is what turns a peace fought into a battlefield. It is what makes the dragons take sides. It is what makes the small folk suffer, while the nobles argue over precedents and bloodlines. The dance of the dragons is a fantasy, but the fear behind it is real. The fear that when the king dies, everything can fall apart. The fear that a daughter's claim will be dismissed, that a son's ambition will override a father's will, that the law is only as strong as the army that enforces it. So when you watch the Greens and the Blacks maneuver, when you see Rhaenyra's supporters and Aegon's supporters clash, remember that the same drama played out in English castles and on English fields. The names were different, the weapons were different, but the heart of the conflict was the same. And that is why the Dance of the Dragons feels so uncomfortably real, even in a world of fire-breathing monsters and ancient bloodlines. Because the monsters are not the dragons. The monsters are the people who will not let go of a throne. And yet, the Dance of the Dragons does not end with the throne won. It ends with a kingdom hollowed out, a dynasty diminished, and a lesson that echoes through the ages. No crown is worth the price of a realm's ruin. In the real world, the anarchy ended not with a clear victory for Matilda or Stephen, but with a compromise. Stephen kept the crown for his lifetime, but Matilda's son, Henry II, succeeded him, a settlement that saved the kingdom but left the question of female inheritance unresolved for centuries. The Wars of the Roses ended when Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian with a tenuous claim, married Elizabeth of York, uniting the Roses. But that marriage did not erase the bloodshed. It merely papered over it with a new dynasty. The Dance of the Dragons mirrors this too. Rhaenyra's son, Aegon III, inherits a broken realm, a traumatized boy who saw his mother devoured by his uncle's dragon. The Targaryen dragons dwindle, the family's power fades, and the scars of the war never fully heal. That is the true legacy of succession crises. Not the glory of the victor, but the slow decay of everything the victor fought to control. So when you think of the Greens and the Blacks, think not just of the battles, but of the children who lost parents, the lords who lost lands, the small folk who lost everything for a name. The Dance of the Dragons is a warning. It says that when we let ambition override law, when we let bloodline override justice, we do not just fight a war, we create a wound that takes generations to close. And sometimes that wound never closes at all. The historical dispute between Matilda and Stephen gave George R.R. Martin a blueprint for the Dance of the Dragons. But the real story of that war is something no medieval English monarch could have imagined. Because when your weapons are dragons, even winning can destroy everything you are fighting to protect. Consider what it actually means to go to war with dragons. In a conventional conflict, you might burn an enemy camp or besiege a castle with trebuchets and siege towers. But a dragon does not just attack a target. It incinerates everything within a radius of hundreds of feet. Stone melts, wood turns to ash, people become shadows baked into the walls. When a dragon rider decides to destroy a castle, they do not need to breach the gates. They simply fly overhead and turn the entire fortress into an oven. This changes the nature of war entirely. Armies cannot mass in the open without becoming targets. Villages cannot be defended. The great castles of Westeros, which had stood for centuries as symbols of impregnable power, suddenly become death traps. If you are inside when a dragon comes, you either burn or you suffocate on the smoke. There is no surrender that matters, because the dragon does not care about your terms. And here is the terrible irony that defines the Dance of the Dragons. Both sides have dragons, so every battle becomes a race to see who can kill the other side's dragon first. But every dragon that dies is irreplaceable. The Targaryens did not breed new dragons quickly. They did not train new riders easily. Each dragon lost in combat is a permanent reduction in the power of the dynasty itself. This is the moment when House Targaryen begins destroying its own greatest advantage. The very creatures that allowed them to conquer and hold Westeros for a century are now being used against each other, and no matter which side wins a given battle, the Targaryen family loses a dragon, the family loses a rider, the family loses the military supremacy that made them kings in the first place. Think about what that means for the succession itself. The war is being fought to determine who sits on the Iron Throne, but the Iron Throne's power comes from dragons. So every dragon death weakens the throne that the victor will inherit. The winner of the Dance of the Dragons will not receive a united kingdom ruled by fire and blood. They will receive a fractured realm, a diminished dragon fleet, and a family that has spent its own blood fighting itself. The castles and villages caught in the middle have no say in this. When two dragons clash in the sky, the ground below becomes a killing field. Armies that have marched for weeks to join a battle can be scattered in minutes by a single dragon pass. Family lines that have ruled for generations can be erased in an afternoon, because a dragon rider decided their keep was a strategic target, and the riders themselves are not safe. The bond between dragon and rider is intimate, but it is also fragile. A rider can be thrown. A rider can be killed by enemy archers or by another dragon's flame. And when a rider dies, the dragon often becomes wild, unpredictable, and even more dangerous. A dragon without a rider is a weapon without a handler. It does not follow orders. It does not retreat. It simply burns whatever it wants. This is the war that nobody can win cleanly. Every victory carries the seed of future loss. Every dragon that survives a battle is one step closer to being the last dragon. And every Targaryen who dies in the fighting is a reminder that the family's greatest strength is also its greatest vulnerability. The Dance of the Dragons is not just a civil war. It is the moment when House Targaryen begins to dismantle its own empire from the inside. The dragons that made them the gods among men are now the instruments of their mutual destruction, and the fire that once united the Seven Kingdoms is now the fire that will consume them. This is the tragedy that unfolds when the weapons of war are too powerful for the people who wield them. When you can burn your enemies from the sky, you can also burn your own future. And that is exactly what the Targaryens are about to do. The war nobody can win cleanly leaves its scars across the land and across the story itself. But that story, the Dance of the Dragons, the civil war that tore the Targaryens apart, almost never made it to screen in the form we know. Before House of the Dragon became the flagship successor to Game of Thrones, HBO had another prequel in development, one that would have taken viewers thousands of years further back into Westerosi history. It was a project often referred to by the working title Blood Moon, and it was set in the Age of Heroes, during the Long Night, when the first White Walkers descended on the world. A pilot was shot, a full episode with a cast and a vision, but HBO ultimately decided not to move forward with it. The network had invested heavily in that pilot, but after reviewing the footage and considering the direction, they chose to pass. That decision left a gap. Game of Thrones had ended, and the network needed a successor. But Blood Moon was not going to be it, so the search began for a different story, one that could capture the same audience without repeating the same mistakes. And that search eventually led back to the Targaryens, not to the distant past of the First Men, but to the Dragon Lords themselves, to the century when their power was at its peak and their family was tearing itself apart. The idea of adapting fire and blood had been floating around for a while, but it was the failure of Blood Moon that cleared the path. House of the Dragon was ordered straight to series, and the show we now know became the heir to the throne. In a way, the show's own existence mirrors the succession crisis it depicts. One candidate was developed, tested, and set aside. Another was chosen, and it rose to claim the inheritance. The Targaryens and their dragons returned to television, not because they were the first choice. And the story of how that happened is a small tale of television succession all its own. Now that story of succession, of one project falling and another rising, has its own echoes in the way the show itself was built. The show was built on a foundation of difficult choices, starting with the decision to compress decades of history into a manageable narrative. Fire and Blood is a fictional history book covering over 100 years of Targaryen rule. But House of the Dragon needed a clear dramatic arc. The showrunners, Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik, chose to focus on the Dance of the Dragons, but even that conflict spans several years. To make it work on screen, they had to make bold leaps in time, aging characters between episodes, recasting key roles, and trusting the audience to keep up. That was a risk. Game of Thrones had famously struggled with pacing in its later seasons, and here was a show that would jump forward years in a single episode. But the gamble paid off because the time jumps allowed the story to breathe, to show the slow decay of a family, the erosion of trust, and the rise of resentment. Casting was another hurdle. The role of Rhaenyra Targaryen required two actresses, Millie Alcock for the younger version, and Emma Darcy for the older. That was a deliberate choice to show how a spirited princess hardens into a bitter claimant. Similarly, Alicent Hightower was played by Emily Carey as a young woman and Olivia Cooke as an adult. The showrunners wanted the audience to see the transformation, to understand that these characters were not born enemies, but were shaped by the pressures of court, by the expectations and of their father, and by the weight of the crown. The casting of Paddy Considine as Viserys was perhaps the most crucial. In the book, Viserys is a weak king, but the show gave him a tragic depth, a man who loved his family but could not hold them together. His slow decline, both physical and emotional, became the emotional core of the first season. Then there were the dragons. Game of Thrones had 3 dragons, and they were already a visual effects challenge. House of the Dragon would feature 17 distinct dragons, each with its own design, personality, and colour scheme. The team at Pixamondo and other VFX studios had to create new models for each dragon, from the massive Vhagar to the sleek Syrax. They studied real animals, from bats to birds to reptiles, to give each dragon a unique movement and behaviour. The result was a visual feast, but it came at a cost. The budget for the first season was reportedly around $200 million, and every dragon scene required months of planning and rendering. Yet the showrunners insisted on practical effects, where possible, building partial sets for dragon saddles, and using real fire on set to give the actors something to react to. The writing also had to navigate the tricky territory of adapting a historical text. Fire and Blood is written from the perspective of Mesters, with conflicting accounts and unreliable narrators. The show had to choose a version of events, but it also wanted to preserve ambiguity. So scenes were written to show multiple motivations, to let the audience decide who was right and who was wrong. The Greens and the Blacks, the two factions, were both given sympathetic and villainous moments. Alicent's fear for her children's safety was as understandable as Rhaenyra's fury at being usurped. The show did not take sides, and that made the tragedy deeper. Behind the scenes, there were also changes in leadership. Miguel Sapochnik, who had directed some of the most iconic episodes of Game of Thrones, stepped down as co-showrunner after the first season, citing exhaustion. Ryan Condal took over as sole showrunner, and the second season was shaped under his vision. That transition could have been disruptive, but the production team had already established a strong creative foundation. The writer's room, which included Sarah Hess and others, continued to develop the story, focusing on the escalating war, the battles, and the personal costs. The show also had to contend with the legacy of its predecessor. Game of Thrones had ended in controversy, with many fans disappointed by the final season. House of the Dragon had to win back trust. It did so by returning to the elements that made the original great: complex characters, political intrigue, and a sense that no one was safe. The first season ended with a shocking moment: the death of Lucerys Velaryon, a young prince eaten by a dragon. That moment set the stage for the war to come, and it reminded viewers that this show would not flinch from brutality. As the second season approaches, the stakes are higher. The dance is just beginning. The Greens have crowned Aegon II, but Rhaenyra has her own supporters, and the dragons are gathering. The show will have to balance spectacle with character, action with emotion. It will have to show the cost of war, not just in lives, but in the souls of those who wage it. And it will have to do all of this while staying true to the source material, while also making choices that serve the story on screen. In the end, House of the Dragon is a story about legacy, about what we leave behind, and about the lies we tell ourselves to justify our actions. It's a story that almost never happened, that rose from the ashes of another project, and that now carries the weight of an entire franchise on its wings. And if the first season is any indication, it is a story that will continue to surprise, to devastate, and to remind us why we fell in love with Westeros in the first place. When HBO decided to move forward with, after scrapping the earlier prequel project, one of the biggest challenges they faced was making the dragons feel real, and not just real in a visual effects sense, but real for the actors who had to ride them. Because in this show, dragon riding isn't something you can fake with a green screen and a few hand gestures. The performers had to actually sit on mechanical rigs that bucked, swayed, and tilted, all while being blasted with wind and rain, surrounded by noise that was anything but medieval. These rigs were essentially giant motion platforms, sometimes called gimbals, that could simulate the movement of a flying dragon. The actors were strapped into custom saddles, often with harnesses that kept them secure during the most violent maneuvers. And while the final footage would eventually show them soaring over King's Landing or diving toward a battlefield, the reality on set was far less glamorous. They were surrounded by crew members in modern gear, holding fans and spray nozzles, shouting cues over the roar of machinery. The wind machines were powerful enough to make your eyes water, and the rain was cold and relentless. It was, by all accounts, a physically demanding and often uncomfortable experience. But that discomfort, exactly what made the performances convincing. When you see a dragon rider grimacing against the wind, or struggling to hold on during a sharp turn, that isn't acting in the traditional sense. That is a real person fighting against a real machine, trying to stay in character while their body is being thrown around. The actors had to imagine the dragon beneath them, the landscape rushing past, the heat of the beast's breath, but the physical sensations were real. The jolt of the rig, the sting of the rain, the deafening noise of the hydraulics and fans. And then, months later, in post-production, the visual effects team would replace the mechanical platform with a fully rendered dragon, paint in the sky and the ground, and add the sounds of leathery wings and roaring fire. What started as a performer strapped to a piece of industrial equipment in a sound stage became a flight over Westeros. It's a strange contrast when you think about it. On one side, you have the ancient fantasy of dragon riding, a bond between human and beast that goes back thousands of years in the lore of this world. On the other side, you have the very modern machinery that made it possible. Hydraulic pistons, computer-controlled motion bases, and high-pressure water hoses. The actors were essentially riding a robot, but they had to sell the illusion that they were riding a living creature, and they did it so well that audiences forget they're watching a special effect. This kind of practical approach is rare in big-budget television. Many shows would have simply put the actors on a static prop and added all the movement digitally, but the creators have wanted the physicality, the sense of weight and inertia that comes from a real moving platform. It meant the actors could react naturally to the motion, their bodies tensing and relaxing in ways that would be hard to animate convincingly later. And it gave the dragon riding sequences a visceral quality that stands out even in a show filled with spectacle. So the next time you see a character like Rhaenyra or Daemon soaring through the clouds, remember that underneath that digital dragon, there was a very real machine who had to brave the wind and the rain and the noise, all while pretending they were somewhere else entirely. It's a reminder that even the most fantastical moments in this show are built on a foundation of hard work and clever engineering, and that in its own way is just as impressive as the dragons themselves. And yet, for all the technical wizardry behind those dragon rigs, there was another layer of complexity that often goes unnoticed. The sheer choreography required when multiple dragons share the same scene. Imagine trying to coordinate 2 or 3 mechanical platforms, each moving independently, while the actors on them have to maintain eye contact and deliver dialogue as if they're flying side by side. The timing had to be precise to within fractions of a second, because if one rig lurched a moment too early or too late, the illusion of two dragons banking together would be shattered. The crew would run through the scene dozens of times, marking positions on the floor with tape, rehearsing the movements until the actors could anticipate the jolts instinctively. And then, in post-production, the visual effects team would not only replace the rigs, but also stitch together the separate shots, aligning the dragon's wing beats and tail swishes so that they seemed to move as one. It was a dance between human performers, machines and digital artists, all working in concert to create a single believable moment. Beyond the physical demands, there was also the challenge of making the dragons feel like distinct characters. Each dragon inn has its own personality, its own temperament, and its own visual design. Syrax is sleek and golden, Caraxes is long and sinuous with a reddish hue, Vhagar is massive and battle-scarred. The actors had to treat their dragons as partners, not just vehicles. That meant learning specific cues for each beast. How it would turn, how it would breathe fire, how it would react to danger. The showrunners even gave the dragons backstories, which the cast absorbed to inform their performances. When Rhaenyra mounts Syrax, she isn't just climbing onto a machine, she's greeting an old friend. And when Daemon rides Caraxes, there's a wildness in his movements that mirrors the dragon's own ferocity. The actors studied animal behaviour, wolves, eagles, even horses, to understand how a creature of that size and power might move. They watched documentaries on flight dynamics and predator-prey interactions. All of that research fed into the subtle shifts in posture and grip that you see on screen. And let's not forget the sound design. The dragon's roars and growls were built from layers of real animal recordings. Lion roars, elephant trumpets, the hiss of steam engines, even the crackle of fire. But the actors on set had to perform without hearing those sounds. Instead, they listened to a rough audio track of clicks and buzzes that simulated the rhythm of the dragon's breathing. It was like acting to a metronome. They had to time their lines and their reactions to a beat that would later be replaced by a thunderous roar. That takes an incredible amount of trust in the post-production team. You have to believe that when you shout a command to your dragon, the sound team will make it sound like the beast is responding in kind. And they did, every time. In the end, the dragons are a testament to what happens when practical effects, digital artistry, and human performance collide. They are not just visual effects. They are characters in their own right, brought to life by the sweat and strain of actors who refuse to let the illusion break. So the next time you watch a scene with dragons, pay attention to the small things. The way an actor's hand tightens on the reins, the way their body leans into a turn, the way their eyes track something that isn't there. That is the magic of filmmaking, hiding in plain sight. And it all starts with a person strapped to a machine, pretending to fly. All that work, building mechanical rigs, training actors in High Valyrian, and redesigning the Iron Throne into something far more monstrous than what audiences remembered from Game of Thrones. All had to land with the public, and the question hanging over the entire production was whether anyone would actually care. The final season of Game of Thrones had left a bitter taste for millions of viewers. The discourse was loud, the disappointment was real, and the idea of returning to Westeros felt like a gamble. But on August 21, 2022, House of the Dragon premiered, and the answer came back almost immediately. Nearly 10 million viewers watched that first episode across all of HBO's platforms on the night it aired. That number alone would have been a triumph for any new series. But what made it remarkable was the context. This was a prequel to a show that had ended with a deeply divided fan base. Many people had sworn they were done with Westeros forever. And yet, when the doors to the Dragon Pit opened and the Targaryen sigil appeared on screen again, the audience returned. The premiere wasn't just a one-night curiosity either. Within the first 5 days, that initial audience had more than doubled, with around 20 million viewers tuning in across HBO and HBO Max. The show became the most watched series premiere in HBO's history at that point, and HBO wasted no time. Just a few days after the premiere aired, the network officially renewed House of the Dragon for a second season. The decision was announced before the first season had even finished its run. It was a vote of confidence that erased any doubt about whether the franchise still had life in it. The first season ran for 10 episodes, telling the slow burn story of a succession crisis that would eventually tear a family apart. But the second season took a slightly different shape. It premiered on June 16, 2024, and this time the season was shorter, only 8 episodes. That tighter run reflected a shift in storytelling. The war was no longer brewing in the shadows. It had arrived, and the showrunners wanted to keep the pace lean and the tension high. What's interesting is how quickly the audience returned for that second season. The gap between seasons was nearly 2 years, which is long by television standards. But the cultural momentum from the first season carried through. The early audience surge after the divisive ending of Game of Thrones had proven that the world Martin built was bigger than any one show. People were hungry for more Dragon Lords, more political scheming, and more of that specific brand of brutal, character-driven drama that only Westeros seems to deliver. And so the dance of the dragons continued, with millions of viewers watching the Targaryen family burn itself from the inside out. But the return to Westeros wasn't just about audience numbers. It was also about the weight of history, both the fictional history of the Targaryen dynasty and the real-world history of a television franchise that had to prove it could survive its own ending. And in that sense, House of the Dragon succeeded in ways that even the most optimistic predictions hadn't fully anticipated. The show didn't just bring people back, it reminded everyone why they had fallen in love with this world in the first place. But the story of House of the Dragon is not just about ratings and renewals. It is also about the creative decisions that shaped the show into something distinct from its predecessor. One of the most significant choices was the time jump. The first season spans roughly 30 years, with actors aging out of roles and new performers stepping in to play the same characters as adults. That kind of structural risk could have confused audiences or broken the emotional continuity. Instead, it became one of the show's defining features. It allowed the story to breathe, to show how childhood grievances hardened into adult grudges, and how the seeds of war were planted long before the first sword was drawn. The casting of Emma Darcy as the older Rhaenyra Targaryen and Olivia Cooke as the older Alicent Hightower brought a new depth to the central conflict. Their performances turned a political feud into a deeply personal tragedy. You could see the friendship that had once existed between these two women, and you could feel the pain of watching it corrode into hatred. That emotional core is what elevated House of the Dragon beyond a simple prequel. It made the war feel inevitable and heartbreaking at the same time. Another crucial element was the handling of violence. Game of Thrones had been infamous for its brutality, especially toward women. House of the Dragon took a different approach. It did not shy away from depicting the horrors of childbirth, the casual cruelty of patriarchal power, and the way women's bodies were treated as political currency. But it also gave its female characters agency and complexity. Rhaenyra's struggle for the throne is not just a power play, it is a fight for her very identity, in a world that wants to reduce her to a broodmare. Alicent's manipulation of her son, Aegon II, is not just ambition. It is a desperate attempt to secure her own survival in a court that would discard her the moment she lost her usefulness. The show understood that the most compelling drama comes not from dragons breathing fire, but from people making impossible choices. The visual effects also deserve mention. The dragons in House of the Dragon are not just props, they are characters in their own right, each with a distinct personality and design. Vhagar, the oldest and largest dragon, moves like a living mountain, slow and terrifying. Syrax, Rhaenyra's dragon, is sleek and golden, reflecting her rider's regal bearing. Caraxes, Daemon's dragon, is lean and serpentine, with a wildness that mirrors its master's temperament. The animators and visual effects artists spent years bringing these creatures to life, and it shows in every frame. The dragon battles in the second season are some of the most spectacular sequences ever put on television, combining practical set pieces with digital artistry to create a sense of scale and danger that feels visceral. But perhaps the most important lesson from House of the Dragon's success is that audiences are willing to forgive a disappointing ending if the journey is worth taking. Game of Thrones stumbled in its final season, but the world George R. Martin created is too rich and too vast to be defined by a single misstep. House of the Dragon proved that there are still countless stories to tell in Westeros, and that the fans are ready to hear them. The show has already been renewed for a third season, and plans are in motion for other spin-offs, including a series about Aegon the Conqueror and a show set in the world of the Sea Snake. The franchise is alive and thriving, not because of nostalgia, but because of the enduring power of great storytelling. And as the Dance of the Dragons continues to unfold, one thing is clear: the fire has not gone out. It is burning brighter than ever. The premiere have brought nearly 10 million viewers back to Westeros on that August night in 2022. But the story they return to is not one of triumph. It is the slow, inevitable tale of a house that burns itself down. A dynasty with dragons cannot settle who should wear a crown, and that single failure becomes the engine of its own destruction. Every oath, every marriage, every inheritance dispute in Targaryen history has been leading toward the dance. The Great Council of Harrenhal in 101 AC, where the Lords of Westeros chose Viserys over Rhaenys, set a precedent that a woman could not inherit the Iron Throne. Yet Viserys himself later named his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir, breaking that very precedent. The contradiction was baked into the dynasty from the moment Aegon, the Conqueror, first sat on that throne of melted swords. The Targaryens believed their blood made them special, that their dragons made them untouchable. But blood and dragons cannot solve a succession crisis when the claimants both have scales and fire. The ancient Targaryen dream of power, born in the smoking ruins of old Valyria, becomes a slow tale of family collapse. Aegon the Conqueror unified the Seven Kingdoms through fear and flame, but he never established a clear law of inheritance. He simply took what he wanted and expected his descendants to figure out the rest. For 100 years they did. They married brother to sister, kept the bloodline pure, and let the dragons grow. But when Viserys I died, the unresolved question exploded. His daughter Rhaenyra had been named heir, but his son Aegon II had the support of the court, the faith, and the old traditions. The realms split. Oaths sworn to Rhaenyra were broken. Marriages that were meant to bind houses became weapons. The Sea Snake, Orlis Velaryon, had tied his family to the throne through marriage, but even that alliance fractured under the weight of competing claims. The tragedy is not that the Targaryens fought each other, it is that they could not stop. The Dance of the Dragons was not a war between two sides. It was a war within one family. Brothers killed brothers. Cousins burned cousins. Dragons died by the dozens, and with each death, the house lost a piece of its own myth. Vhagar, the oldest and largest dragon alive, had been ridden by Visenya during the Conquest, then by Balon, then by Laena Velaryon, and finally by Aemon Targaryen. That ancient creature, a living relic of Valyria, became a weapon of fratricide. Caraxes, the bloodworm, was ridden by Daemon Targaryen, a man who loved his brother and hated his nephew in equal measure. When those two dragons met above the God's Eye, they tore each other apart, and their riders fell with them. The sky rained fire and blood, and the ground shook with the impact of dying monsters. Every dragon death weakened the dynasty. The Targaryens had always been the dragon lords of Westeros, but after the dance, the dragons grew smaller, fewer, and eventually vanished altogether. The house that had once commanded the skies became a house of ghosts, clinging to a throne that no longer felt magical. The dream of power, the dream of unity through fire, became a nightmare of paranoia and decay. By the time Daenerys Targaryen hatched her 3 eggs nearly 2 centuries later, the memory of the dance had faded into legend. But the lesson remained: a dynasty that cannot agree on who should wear the crown will tear itself apart. And so we end where we began, with dragons above Westeros. They are magnificent, sleepy, and dangerous. They circle the Red Keep in the golden light of a setting sun, their wings casting long shadows over the city below. They are the pride of House Targaryen, the proof of their power, the living symbols of their right to rule. But they are also the instruments of their ruin. The dragons do not care about oaths or marriages or inheritance. They only know their riders. And when the riders turn on each other, the dragons follow. The sky above Westeros is beautiful and terrible, filled with creatures that could burn it all down in a single afternoon. And that is the truth of this house. It built its kingdom on fire, and fire does not discriminate.